Story 21 of Lucy Maud Montgomery's Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jadapi. Lucy Maud Montgomery's Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 21. The Girl at the Gate. Something very strange happened the night old Mr. Lawrence died. I have never been able to explain it, and I have never spoken of it except to one person, and she said that I dreamed it. I did not dream it. I saw and heard, waking. We had not expected Mr. Lawrence to die then. He did not seem very ill. Not nearly so ill as he had been during his previous attack. When we heard of his illness I went over to Woodlands to see him, for I had always been a great favorite with him. The big house was quiet, the servants going about their work as usual, without any appearance of excitement. I was told that I could not see Mr. Lawrence for a little while, as the doctor was with him. Mrs. Yeats, the housekeeper, said the attack was not serious, and asked me to wait in the blue parlour, but I preferred to sit down on the steps of the big arched front door. It was an evening in June. Woodlands was very lovely. To my right was the garden, and before me was a little valley abrim with the sunset. In places under the big trees it was quite dark even then. There was something unusually still in the evening, a stillness as of waiting. It set me thinking of the last time Mr. Lawrence had been ill, nearly a year ago in August. One night during his convalescence I had watched by him to relieve the nurse. He had been sleepless and talkative, telling me many things about his life. Finally he told me of Margaret. I knew a little about her, that she had been his sweetheart and had died very young. Mr. Lawrence had remained true to her memory ever since, but I had never heard him speak of her before. "She was very beautiful," he said dreamily, "and she was only 18 when she died, Jeanette. She had wonderful pale golden hair and dark brown eyes. I have a little ivory miniature of her. When I die it is to be given to you, Jeanette. I have waited a long while for her. You know, she promised she would come." I did not understand his meaning and kept silence, thinking that he might be wandering a little bit in his mind. "She promised me she would come, and she will keep her word," he went on. "I was with her when she died. I held her in my arms. She said to me, 'Herbert, I promise that I will be true to you forever, through as many years of lonely heaven as I must know before you come. And when your time is at hand, I will come to make your deathbed easy, as you have made mine. I will come, Herbert.' She solemnly promised, Jeanette. We made a death tryst of it, and I know she will come." He had fallen asleep then, and after his recovery he had not alluded to the matter again. I had forgotten it, but I recalled it now as I sat on the steps among the geraniums that June evening. I liked to think of Margaret, the lovely girl who had died so long ago, taking her lover's heart with her to the grave. She had been a sister of my grandfather, and people told me that I resembled her slightly. Perhaps that was why old Mr. Lawrence had always made such a pet of me. Presently the doctor came out and nodded to me cheerily. I asked him how Mr. Lawrence was. "Better, better," he said briskly. "He will be all right tomorrow. The attack was very slight. Yes, of course you may go in. Don't stay longer than half an hour." Mrs. Stewart, Mr. Lawrence's sister, was in the sick room when I went in. She took advantage of my presence to lie down on the sofa a little while, for she had been up all the preceding night. Mr. Lawrence turned his fine old silver head on the pillow and smiled a greeting. He was a very handsome old man. Neither age nor illness had marred his finely modelled face, or impaired the flash of his keen steel blue eyes. He seemed quite well, and talked naturally and easily of many commonplace things. At the end of the doctor's half hour I rose to go. Mrs. Stewart had fallen asleep, and he would not let me wake her, saying he needed nothing and felt like sleeping himself. I promised to come up again on the morrow, and went out. It was dark in the hall, where no lamp had been lighted, but outside on the lawn the moonlight was bright as day. It was the clearest, whitest night I ever saw. I turned aside into the garden, meaning to cross it and take the short way over the west meadow home. There was a long walk of rose bushes leading across the garden to a little gate on the further side, the way Mr. Lawrence had been wont to take long ago when he went over the fields to woo Margaret. I went along it, enjoying the night. The bushes were white with roses, and the ground under my feet was all snowed over with their petals. The air was still and breezeless. Again I felt that sensation of waiting, of expectancy. As I came up to the little gate I saw a little girl standing on the other side of it. She stood in the full moonlight, and I saw her distinctly. She was tall and slight, and her head was bare. I saw that her hair was a pale gold, shining somewhat strangely about her head, as if catching the moonbeams. Her face was very lovely, and her eyes large and dark. She was dressed in something white and softly shimmering, and in her hand she held a white rose, a very large and perfect one. Even at the time I found myself wondering where she could have picked it. It was not a Woodlands rose. All the Woodlands roses were smaller and less double. She was a stranger to me, yet I felt that I had seen her or someone very like her before. Possibly she was one of Mr. Lawrence's many nieces who might have come up to Woodlands upon hearing of his illness. As I opened the gate I felt an odd chill of positive fear. Then she smiled as if I had spoken my thought. "Do not be afraid," she said. "There is no reason you should be frightened. I have only come to keep a tryst." The words reminded me of something, but I could not recall what it was. The strange fear that was on me deepened. I could not speak. She came through the gateway and stood for a moment at my side. "It is strange that you should have seen me," she said. "But now behold how strong and beautiful a thing is faithful love, strong enough to conquer death. We who have loved truly love always, and this makes our heaven." She walked on after she had spoken, down the long rose path. I watched her until she reached the house and went up the steps. In truth, I thought the girl was someone not quite in her right mind. When I reached home I did not speak of the matter to anyone, not even to inquire who the girl might possibly be. There seemed to be something in that strange meeting that demanded my silence. The next morning word came that old Mr. Lawrence was dead. When I hurried down to Woodlands I found all in confusion, but Mrs. Yeats took me into the blue parlour and told me what little there was to tell. "He must have died soon after you left him, Miss Jeanette," she sobbed, "for Mrs. Stewart wakened at 10 o'clock and he was gone. He lay there smiling, with such a strange look on his face, as if he had just seen something that made him wonderfully happy. I never saw such a look on a dead face before." "Who is there besides Mrs. Stewart?" I asked. "Nobody," said Mrs. Yeats. "We have sent word to all his friends, but they have not had time to arrive here yet." "I met a young girl in the garden last night," I said slowly. "She came into the house. I did not know her, but I thought she must be a relative of Mr. Lawrence's." Mrs. Yeats shook her head. "No, it must have been somebody from the village, although I don't know of anyone calling after you went away." I said nothing more to her about it. After the funeral Mrs. Stewart gave me Margaret's miniature. I had never seen it or any picture of Margaret before. The face was very lovely, also strangely like my own, although I am not beautiful. It was the face of the young girl I had met at the gate. End of The Girl at the Gate. Recording by Jadopy. www.jadopy.wordpress.com.
Story 22 of Lucy Maud Montgomery, Short Stories 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tika Sabu. Lucy Maud Montgomery, Short Stories 1905 to 1906 by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 22, The Light on the Big Dipper. "Don't let Nellie run out of doors, Mary Margaret, and be careful of the fire, Mary Margaret. I expect we'll be back pretty soon after dark, so don't be lonesome, Mary Margaret." Mary Margaret laughed and switched her long, thick braid of black hair from one shoulder to the other. "No fear of my being lonesome, Mother Campbell. I'll be just as careful as can be, and there are so many things to be done, that I'll be busy and happy as a bee all day long. Nellie and I will have just the nicest kind of time. I won't get lonesome, but if I should feel just tempted to, I'll think Father is on his way home. He will soon be here, and that would drive the lonesomeness away before it dared show its face. Don't you worry, Mother Campbell." Mother Campbell smiled. She knew she could trust Mary Margaret. Careful, steady, prudent little Mary Margaret. That was just the trouble. Careful and steady and prudent as Mary Margaret might be, she was only 12 years old after all, and there would not be another soul besides her and Nellie on the Little Dipper that whole day. Mrs. Campbell felt that she hardly dared to go away under such circumstances, and yet she must dare it. Oscar Bryan had sailed over from the mainland that evening before, with word that her sister Nan, her only sister, who lived in Cartonville, was ill and about to undergo a serious operation. She must go see her, and Uncle Martin was waiting with his boat to take her over to the mainland to catch the morning train for Cartonville. If 5-year-old Nellie had been quite well, Mrs. Campbell would have taken both her and Mary Margaret and locked up the house. But Nellie had a very bad cold and was quite unfit to go sailing across the harbour on a raw, chilly November day. So there was nothing to do but leave Mary Margaret in charge. And Mary Margaret was quite pleased at the prospect. "You know, Mother Campbell, I'm not afraid of anything except tramps, and no tramps ever come to the Dippers. You see what an advantage it is to live on an island? There, Uncle Martin is waving. Run along, little mother." Mary Margaret watched the boat out of sight from the window, and betook herself to doing of her tasks, singing lightly all the while. It was rather nice to be left in sole charge like this. It made you feel so important and grown up. She would do everything very nicely, and Mother would see when she came back what a good housekeeper her daughter was. Mary Margaret and Nellie and Mrs. Campbell had been living on the Little Dipper ever since the preceding April. Before that, they had always lived in their own cozy home at the harbour head. But in April Captain Campbell had sailed in the two sisters for a long voyage, and before he went, Mrs. Campbell's brother, Martin Clow, had come to them with a proposition. He ran a lobster cannery on the Little Dipper, and he wanted his sister to go and keep house for him while her husband was away. After some discussion, it was so arranged, and Mrs. Campbell and her two girls moved to the Little Dipper. It was not a lonesome place then, for the lobstermen and their families lived on it, and boats were constantly sailing to and fro between it and the mainland. Mary Margaret enjoyed her summer greatly. She bathed and sailed and roamed over the rocks, and on fine days her Uncle George, who kept the lighthouse on the Big Dipper, had lived there all alone, often came over and took her across to the Big Dipper. Mary Margaret thought the lighthouse was a wonderful place. Uncle George taught her how to light the lamps and manage the light. When the lobster season dosed, the men took up cod fishing and carried this on till October, when they all moved back to the mainland. But Uncle Martin was building a house for himself at Harbour Head, and did not wish to move until the ice formed over the bay, because it would then be so much easier to transport his goods and chattels, so the Campbells stayed with him until the captain should return. Mary Margaret found plenty to do that day, and wasn't a bit lonesome. But when evening came, she didn't feel quite so cheerful. Nelly had fallen asleep, and there wasn't another living creature except the cat on the Little Dipper. Besides, it looked like a storm. The harbour was glassy calm, but the sky was very black and dour in the north-east. Like snow, thought weather-wise Mary Margaret. She hoped her mother would get home before it began, and she wished the lighthouse star would gleam out on the Big Dipper. It would seem like the bright eye of a steady old friend. Mary Margaret always watched for it every night. Just as soon as the sun went down, the big lighthouse star would flash goldenly out in the northeastern sky. "I'll sit down by the window and watch for it," said Mary Margaret to herself. "Then, when it is lighted, I'll get up a nice warm supper for Mother and Uncle Martin." Mary Margaret sat down by the kitchen window to watch. Minute after minute passed, but no light flashed out on the Big Dipper. What was the matter? Mary Margaret began to feel uneasy. It was too cloudy to tell just when the sun had set, but she was sure it must be down, for it was quite dark in the house. She lighted a lamp, got the almanac, and hunted out the exact time of sunsetting. The sun had been down 15 minutes, and there was no light on the Big Dipper. Mary Margaret felt alarmed and anxious. What was wrong at the Big Dipper? Was Uncle George away, or had something happened to him? Mary Margaret was sure he had never forgotten. 15 minutes longer did Mary Margaret watch restlessly at the window. Then she concluded that something was desperately wrong somewhere. It was half an hour after sunset, and the Big Dipper light, the most important one along the whole coast, was not lighted. What would she do? What could she do? The answer came swift and dear into Mary Margaret's steady, sensible little mind. She must go to the Big Dipper and light the lamps. But could she? Difficulties came crowding thick and fast into her thoughts. It was going to snow. The soft broad flakes were falling already. Could she row the 2 miles to the Big Dipper in the darkness and the snow? If she could, dare she leave Nelly all alone in the house? Oh, she couldn't. Somebody at the harbour head would surely notice that the Big Dipper light was unlighted, and would go over to investigate the cause. But suppose they shouldn't? If the snow came thicker, they might never notice the absence of the light. And suppose there was a ship away out there, as there nearly always was, with the dangerous rocks and shoals of the outer harbour to pass, with precious lives on board, and no guiding beacon on the Big Dipper. Mary Margaret hesitated no longer. She must go. Bravely, briskly, and thoughtfully she made her preparations. First, the fire was banked and the draughts closed. Then she wrote a little note for her mother and laid it on the table. Finally, she wakened Nelly. "Nelly," said Mary Margaret, speaking very kindly and determinedly, "there is no light on the Big Dipper. I've got to row over and see about it. I'll be back as quickly as I can, and Mother and Uncle Martin will soon be here. You won't be afraid to stay alone, will you, dearie? You mustn't be afraid, because I have to go. And, Nelly, I'm going to tie you in your chair. It's necessary, because I can't lock the door, so you mustn't cry. Nothing will hurt you. And I want you to be a brave little girl and help sister all you can." Mary Margaret put on her jacket, hoods, and mittens, and took Uncle Martin's lantern. As she went out and closed the door, a little wail from Nelly sounded on her ear. For a moment she hesitated. Then the blackness of the Big Dipper confirmed her resolution. She must go. Nelly was really quite safe and comfortable. It would not hurt her to cry a little, and it might hurt somebody a great deal if the Big Dipper light failed. Setting her lips firmly, Mary Margaret ran down to the shore. Like all the harbour girls, Mary Margaret could row a boat from the time she was 9 years old. Nevertheless, her heart almost failed her as she got into the little dory and rowed out. The snow was getting thick. Could she pull across those black 2 miles between the Dippers before it got so much thicker that she would lose her way? Well, she must risk it. She had set the light in the kitchen window. She must keep it fair behind her, and then she would land on the lighthouse beach. With a murmured prayer for help and guidance, she pulled staunchly away. It was a long, hard row for the little 12-year-old arms. Fortunately, there was no wind, but thicker and thicker came the snow. Finally, the kitchen light was hidden in it. For a moment, Mary Margaret's heart sank in despair. The next, it gave a joyful bound, for turning, she saw the dark tower of the lighthouse directly behind her. By the aid of her lantern, she rowed to the landing, sprang out, and made her boat fast. A minute later, she was in the lighthouse kitchen. The door leading to the tower stairs was open, and at the foot of the stairs lay Uncle George, limp and white. "Oh, Uncle George!" gasped Mary Margaret. "What is the matter? What has happened?" "Mary Margaret! Thank God! I was just praying to him to send somebody to tend the light. Who's with you?" "Nobody. I got frightened because there was no light, and I rowed over. Mother and Uncle Martin are away." "You don't mean to say you rowed yourself over here alone in the dark and snow? Well, you're the pluckiest little girl about this harbour. It's a mercy I've showed you how to manage the light. Run up and start it at once. Don't mind about me. I tumbled down those pesky stairs like the awkward old fool I am. And I've broke my leg and hurt my back so bad I can't crawl an inch. I've been lying here for 3 mortal hours, and they've seemed like 3 years. Hurry with the light, Mary Margaret." Mary Margaret hurried. Soon the Big Dipper light was once more gleaming cheerfully athwart the stormy harbour. Then she ran back to her uncle. There was not much she could do for him beyond covering him warmly with quilts, placing a pillow under his head, and brewing him a hot drink of tea. "I left a note for Mother telling her where I'd gone, Uncle George, so I'm sure Uncle Martin will come right over as soon as they get home." "You'll have to hurry. It's blowing up now. Hear it, and snowing thick. If your mother and Martin haven't left the harbour head before this, they won't leave it tonight. But anyhow, the light is lit. I don't mind my getting smashed up compared to that. I thought I'd go crazy lying here picturing to myself a vessel out of the reefs." The night was a very long and anxious one. The storm grew rapidly, and snow and wind howled around the lighthouse. Uncle George soon grew feverish and delirious, and Mary Margaret, between her anxiety for him and her dismal thoughts of poor Nellie tied in her chair over the Little Dipper, and the dark possibility of her mother and Uncle Martin being out in the storm, felt almost distracted. But the morning came at last, as mornings blessedly will, be the nights never so long and anxious, and it dawned fine and clear over a white world. Mary Margaret ran to the shore, and gazed eagerly across at the Little Dipper. No smoke was visible from Uncle Martin's house. She could leave Uncle George, who was raving wildly, and yet it was necessary to obtain assistance somehow. Suddenly she remembered the distress signal. She must hoist it. How fortunate that Uncle George had once shown her how! 10 minutes later there was a commotion over at Harbour Head, where the signal was promptly observed, and very well. Although it seemed long enough to Mary Margaret, a boat came sailing over to the Big Dipper. When the men landed, they were met by a very white-faced girl, who gasped out a rather disjointed story of a light that hadn't been lighted, and an uncle with a broken leg, and a sister tied in her chair. And would they please see to Uncle George at once, for she must go straight over to the other Dipper. One of the men rowed her over, but before they were halfway there, another boat went sailing across the harbour, and Mary Margaret saw a woman and 2 men land from it and hurry up to the house. "That is Mother and Uncle Martin, but who can the other man be?" wondered Mary Margaret. When she reached the cottage, her mother and Uncle Martin were reading her note, and Nellie, just untied from her chair, where she had been found fast asleep, was in the arms of a great big brown bewhiskered man. Mary Margaret just gave one look at the man, then she flew across the room with a cry of delight. "Father!" For 10 minutes not one intelligible word was said, what with laughing and crying and kissing. Mary Margaret was the first to recover herself and say briskly, "Now do explain, somebody. Tell me how it all happened." "Martin and I had got back to the harbour head too late last night to cross over," said her mother. It would have been madness to try to cross in the storm, although I was nearly wild thinking of you two children. It's well I didn't know the whole truth, or I'd have been simply frantic. We stayed at the Head all night, and first thing this morning came your father." "We came in last night," said Captain Campbell. "It was pitch dark, not a light to be seen, and beginning to snow. We didn't know where we were, and I was terribly worried, when all at once the Big Dipper light I've been looking for so vainly flashed out, and everything was all right in a moment. But Mary Margaret, if that light hadn't appeared, we'd never have gotten past the reefs. You've saved your father's ship and all the lives in her, my brave little girl." "Oh!" Mary Margaret drew a long breath, and her eyes were starred with tears of happiness. "Oh, I'm so thankful I went over. And I had to tie Nellie in her chair, Mother. There was no other way. Uncle George broke his leg and is very sick this morning. And there's no breakfast ready for anyone, and the fire black out. But that doesn't matter when Father is safe, and oh, I'm so tired." And then Mary Margaret sat down just for a moment, intending to get right up and help her mother light the fire, laid her head on her father's shoulder, and fell sound asleep before she ever suspected it. End of The Light on the Big Dipper.
Story 23 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jean Bascom. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 23. The Prodigal Brother. Miss Hannah was cutting asters in her garden. It was a very small garden, for nothing would grow beyond the shelter of the little grey, low-eaved house, which alone kept the north-east winds from blighting everything with salt spray. But small as it was a miracle of blossoms and a marvel of neatness. The trim brown paths were swept clean of every leaf or fallen petal. Each of the little square beds had its border of big white quahog clam-shells, and not even a sweet pea vine would have dared to straggle from its appointed course under Miss Hannah's eye. Miss Hannah had always lived in the little grey house down by the shore, so far away from all the other houses in prospect, and so shut away from them by a circle of hills that it had a seeming isolation. Not another house could Miss Hannah see from her own door-stone. She often declared she could not have borne it if it had not been for the lighthouse beacon at night flaming over the north-west hill behind the house like a great unwinking, friendly star that never failed even on the darkest night. Behind the house a little tongue of the St. Lawrence Gulf ran up between the headlands until the wavelets of its tip almost lapped against Miss Hannah's kitchen doorstep. Beyond, to the north, was the great crescent of the gulf, whose murmur had been Miss Hannah's lullaby all her life. When people wondered to her how she could endure living in such a lonely place, she retorted that the loneliness was what she loved it for, and that the lighthouse star and the far-away call of the gulf had always been company enough for her, and always would be, until Ralph came back. When Ralph came home, of course, he might like a livelier place, and they might move to town or up country as he wished. Of course, said Miss Hannah with a proud smile, a rich man mightn't fancy living away down here in a little grey house by the shore. He'll be for building me a mansion, I expect, and I'd like it fine. But until he comes I must be contented with things as they are. People always smiled to each other when Miss Hannah talked like this, but they took care not to let her see the smile. Miss Hannah snipped her white and purple asters off ungrudgingly, and sang as she snipped an old-fashioned song she had learned long ago in her youth. The day was one of October's rarest, and Miss Hannah loved fine days. The air was clear as golden-hued crystal, and all the slopes around her were mellow and hazy in the autumn sunshine. She knew that beyond those sunny slopes were woods glorying in crimson and gold, and she would have the delight of a walk through them later on when she went to carry the asters to sick Milly Starr at the bridge. Flowers were all Miss Hannah had to give, for she was very poor, but she gave them with a great wealth of friendliness and goodwill. Presently a wagon drove down her lane and pulled up outside of her white garden paling. Jacob Delancey was in it, with a pretty young niece of his, who was a visitor from the city, and Miss Hannah, her sheaf of asters in her arms, went over to the paling with a sparkle of interest in her faded blue eyes. She had heard a great deal of the beauty of this strange girl. Prospect people had been talking of nothing else for a week, and Miss Hannah was filled with a harmless curiosity concerning her. She always liked to look at pretty people, she said. They did her as much good as her flowers. "Good afternoon, Miss Hannah," said Jacob Delancey. "Busy with your flowers, as usual, I see." "Oh, yes," said Miss Hannah, managing to stare with unobtrusive delight at the girl while she talked. "The frost will soon be coming now, you know, so I want to live among them as much as I can while they're here." "That's right," assented Jacob, who made a profession of cordial agreement with everybody, and would have said the same words in the same tone had Miss Hannah announced a predilection for living in the cellar. "Well, Miss Hannah, it's flowers I'm after myself just now. We're having a bit of a party at our house tonight for the young folks, and my wife told me to call and ask if you could let us have a few for decoration." "Of course," said Miss Hannah, "you can have these. I meant them for Milly, but I can cut the west bed for her." She opened the gate and carried the asters over to the buggy. Miss Delancey took them with a smile that made Miss Hannah remember the date forever. "Lovely day," commented Jacob genially. "Yes," said Miss Hannah dreamily. "It reminds me of the day Ralph went away 20 years ago. It doesn't seem so long. Don't you think he'll be coming back soon, Jacob?" "Oh, sure," said Jacob, who thought the very opposite. "I have a feeling that he's coming very soon," said Miss Hannah brightly. "It will be a great day for me, won't it, Jacob? I've been poor all my life, but when Ralph comes back everything will be so different. He will be a rich man and will give me everything I've always wanted. He said he would. A fine house and a carriage and a silk dress. Oh, and we will travel and see the world. You don't know how I look forward to it all. I've got it all planned out, all I'm going to do and have, and I believe he will be here very soon. A man ought to be able to make a fortune in 20 years, don't you think, Jacob?" "Oh, sure," said Jacob, but he said it a little uncomfortably. He did not like the job of throwing cold water, but it seemed to him that he ought not to encourage Miss Hannah's hopes. "Of course, you shouldn't think too much about it, Miss Hannah. He might never come back, or he might be poor." "How can you say such things, Jacob?" interrupted Miss Hannah indignantly, with a little crimson spot flaming out in each of her pale cheeks. "You know quite well he will come back. I am as sure of it as that I am standing here. And he will be rich, too. People are always trying to hint just as you've done to me, but I don't mind them. I know." She turned and went back into her garden with her head held high, but her sudden anger floated away in a whiff of sweet pea perfume that struck her in the face. She waved her hand in farewell to her callers, and watched the buggy down the lane with a smile. "Of course, Jacob doesn't know, and I shouldn't have snapped him up so quick. It'll be my turn to crow when Ralph does come. But isn't that girl pretty? I feel as if I'd been looking at some lovely picture. It just makes a good day of this. Something pleasant happens to me almost every day, and that girl is today's pleasant thing. I just feel real happy and thankful that there are such beautiful creatures in the world, and that we can look at them." "Well, of all the queer delusions," Jacob Delancey was ejaculating as he and his niece drove down the lane. "What is it all about?" asked Miss Delancey curiously. "Well, it's this way, Dorothy. Long ago Miss Hannah had a brother who ran away from home. It was before their father and mother died. Ralph Walworth was as wild a young scamp as ever was in Prospect, and a spendthrift in the bargain. Nobody but Hannah had any use for him, and she just worshipped him. I must admit he was real fond of her, too, and he and his father couldn't get on at all. So finally he ups and runs away. It was generally supposed he went to the mining country. He left a note for Hannah, bidding her good-bye and telling her that he was going to make his fortune and would come back to her a rich man. There's never been a word heard tell of him since, and in my opinion it's doubtful if he's still alive. But Miss Hannah, as you saw, is sure and certain he'll come back yet, with gold dropping out of his pockets. She's as sane as anyone every way else, but there is no doubt she's a little cracked on that point. If he never turns up, she'll go on hoping quite happy to her death. But if he should turn up and be poor, as is 10 times likelier than anything else, I believe it'd almost kill Miss Hannah. She's terrible proud for all she's so sweet. And you saw yourself how mad she got when I kind of hinted he mightn't be rich. If he came back poor after all her boasting about him, I don't fancy he'd get much of a welcome from her. And she'd never hold up her head again, that's certain. So it's to be hoped, say I, that Ralph Walworth never will turn up. unless he comes in a carriage and four, which is about as likely in my opinion as that he'll come in a pumpkin drawn by mice." When October had passed and the grey November days came, the glory of Miss Hannah's garden was over. She was very lonely without her flowers. She missed them more this year than ever. On fine days she paced up and down the walks, and looked sadly at the drooping, unsightly stalks and vines. She was there one afternoon when the north-east wind was up and doing, whipping the gulf waters into whitecaps, and whistling up the inlet, and around the grey eaves. Miss Hannah was mournfully patting a frosted chrysanthemum under its golden chin, when she saw a man limping slowly down the lane. "Now who can that be?" she murmured. "It isn't any Prospect man, for there's nobody lame around here." She went to the garden gate to meet him. He came haltingly up the slope and paused before her, gazing at her wistfully. He looked old and bent and broken, and his clothes were poor and worn. Who was he? Miss Hannah felt that she ought to know him, and her memory went groping back amongst all her recollections. Yet she could think of nobody but her father, who had died 15 years before. "Don't you know me, Hannah?" said the man wistfully. "Have I changed so much as all that?" "Ralph!" It was between a cry and a laugh. Miss Hannah flew through the gate and caught him in her arms. "Ralph, my own dear brother! Oh, I always knew you'd come back! If you knew how I've looked forward to this day!" She was both laughing and crying now. Her face shone with a soft gladness. Ralph Walworth shook his head sadly. "It's a poor wreck of a man I am come back to you, Hannah," he said. "I've never accomplished anything, and my health's broken, and I'm a cripple, as you see. For a time I thought I'd never show my face back here, such a failure as I be. But the longing to see you got too strong. It's not but a wreck I am, Hannah." "You're my own dear brother!" cried Miss Hannah. "Do you think I care how poor you are? And if your health is poor, I'm the one to nurse you up. Who else than your only sister, I'd like to know? Come right in. You're shivering in this wind. I'll mix you a good hot currant drink. I knew them black currants didn't bear so plentiful for nothing last summer. Oh, this is a good day, and no mistake!" In 24 hours' time everybody in Prospect knew that Ralph Walworth had come back home, crippled and poor. Jacob Delancey shook his head as he drove away from the station with Ralph's shabby little trunk standing on end in his buggy. The station master had asked him to take it down to Miss Hannah's, and Jacob did not fancy the errand. He was afraid Miss Hannah would be in a bad way, and he did not know what to say to her. She was in her garden, covering her pansies with seaweed, when he drove up, and she came to the garden gate to meet him, all smiles. "So you've brought Ralph's trunk, Mr. Delancey. Now that was real good of you. He was going over to the station to see about it himself, but he had such a cold that I persuaded him to wait till tomorrow. He's lying down asleep now. He's just real tired. He brought this seaweed up from the shore for me this morning, and it played him out. He ain't strong. But didn't I tell you he was coming back soon? You only laughed at me, but I knew." "He isn't very rich, though," said Jacob jokingly. He was relieved to find that Miss Hannah did not seem to be worrying over this. "That doesn't matter," cried Miss Hannah. "Why, he's my brother. Isn't that enough? I'm rich, if he isn't, rich in love and happiness, and I'm better pleased in a way than if he had come back rich. He might have wanted to take me away or build a fine house, and I'm too old to be making changes. And then he wouldn't have needed me. I'd have been of no use to him. As it is, it's just me he needs to look after him and coddle him. Oh, it's fine to have somebody to do things for, somebody that belongs to you. I was just dreading the loneliness of the winter, and now it's going to be such a happy winter. I declare, last night Ralph and I sat up till morning talking over everything. He's had a hard life of it, bad luck and illness right along. And last winter, in the lumber woods, he got his leg broke. But now he's come home, and we're never going to be parted again as long as we live. I could sing for joy, Jacob." "Oh, sure," assented Jacob cordially. He felt a little dazed. Miss Hannah's nimble change of base was hard for him to follow, and he had an injured sense of having wasted a great deal of commiseration on her when she didn't need it at all. "Only I kind of thought, we all thought, you had such plans." "Well, they served their turn," interrupted Miss Hannah briskly. "They amused me and kept me interested till something real would come in their place. If I'd had to carry them out, I dare say they'd have bothered me a lot. Things are more comfortable as they are. I'm happy as a bird, Jacob." "Oh, sure," said Jacob. He pondered the business deeply all the way back home, but could make nothing of it. "But I ain't obliged to," he concluded sensibly. "Miss Hannah's satisfied and happy, and it's nobody else's concern. However, I call it a curious thing." End of The Prodigal Brother. Recording by Jean Bascom, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Story 24 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories. 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jean Bascom. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 24, The Redemption of John Churchill. John Churchill walked slowly, not as a man walks who is tired, or content to saunter for the pleasure of it, but as one in no haste to reach his destination through dread of it. The day was well on to late afternoon in mid-spring, and the world was abloom. Before him and behind him wound a road that ran like a red ribbon through fields of lush clovery green. The orchards scattered along it were white and fragrant, giving of their incense to a merry south-west wind. Fence-corner nooks were purple with patches of violets, or golden green with the curly heads of young ferns. The roadside was sprinkled over with the gold dust of dandelions, and the pale stars of wild strawberry blossoms. It seemed a day through which a man should walk lightly and blithely, looking the world and his fellows frankly in the face, and opening his heart to let the springtime in. But John Churchill walked laggingly, with bent head. When he met other wayfarers, or was passed by them, he did not lift his face, but only glanced up under his eyebrows with a furtive look that was replaced by a sort of shamed relief when they had passed on without recognizing him. Some of them he knew for friends of the old time. 10 years had not changed them as he had been changed. They had spent those 10 years in freedom and good repute, under God's blue sky, in his glad air and sunshine. He, John Churchill, had spent them behind the walls of a prison. His close-clipped hair was grey. His figure, encased in an ill-fitting suit of coarse cloth, was stooped and shrunken. His face was deeply lined, yet he was not an old man in years. He was only 40. He was 30 when he had been convicted of embezzling the bank funds for purposes of speculation, and had been sent to prison, leaving behind a wife and father who were broken-hearted, and a sister whose pride had suffered more than her heart. He had never seen them since, but he knew what had happened in his absence. His wife had died 2 months later, leaving behind her a baby boy. His father had died within the year. He had killed them. He, John Churchill, who loved them, had killed them, as surely as though his hand had struck them down in cold blood. His sister had taken the baby, his little son whom he had never seen, but for whom he had prepared such a birthright of dishonour. She had never forgiven her brother, and she never wrote to him. He knew that she would have brought the boy up either in ignorance of his father's crime or in utter detestation of it. When he came back to the world after his imprisonment, there was not a single friendly hand to clasp his and help him struggle up again. The best his friends had been able to do for him was to forget him. He was filled with bitterness and despair, and a gnawing hatred of the world of brightness around him. He had no place in it. He was an ugly blot on it. He was a friendless, wifeless, homeless man, who could not so much as look his fellow-men in the face, who must henceforth consort with outcasts. In his extremity he hated God and man, burning with futile resentment against both. Only one feeling of tenderness yet remained in his heart. It centred around the thought of his little son. When he left the prison, he made up his mind what to do. He had a little money which his father had left him, enough to take him West. He would go there under a new name. There would be novelty and adventure to blot out the memories of the old years. He did not care what became of him, since there was no one else to care. He knew in his heart that his future career would probably lead him still further and further downward, but that did not matter. If there had been anybody to care, he might have thought it worth while to struggle back to respectability and trample his shame under feet that should henceforth walk only in the ways of honor and honesty. But there was nobody to care, so he would go to his own place. But first he must see little Joey, who must be quite a big boy now, nearly 10 years old. He would go home and see him just once, even although he dreaded meeting aversion in the child's eyes. Then, when he had bade him good-bye, and, with him, good-bye to all that remained to make for good in his desolated existence, he would go out of his life for ever. "I'll go straight to the devil, then," he said sullenly. "That's where I belong, a jailbird at whom everybody except other jailbirds looks askance. To think what I was once, and what I am now! It's enough to drive a man mad. As for repenting, bah! Who'd believe that I really repented? Who'd give me a second chance on the faith of it? Not a soul. Repentance won't blot out the past. It won't give me back my wife, whom I loved above everything on earth, and whose heart I broke. It won't restore me my unstained name and my right to a place among honorable men. There's no chance for a man who has fallen as low as I have. If Emily were living, I could struggle for her sake. But who'd be fool enough to attempt such a fight, with no motive, and not one chance of success in 100? Not I. I'm down, and I'll stay down. There's no climbing up again. He celebrated his first day of freedom by getting drunk, although he had never before been an intemperate man. Then, when the effects of the debauch wore off, he took the train for Alliston. He would go home and see little Joey once. Nobody at the station where he alighted recognized him or paid any attention to him. He was as a dead man, who had come back to life to find himself effaced from recollection, and his place knowing him no more. It was 3 miles from the station to where his sister lived, and he resolved to walk the distance. Now that the critical moment drew near, he shrank from it and wished to put it off as long as he could. When he reached his sister's home, he halted on the road and surveyed the place over its snug respectability of iron fence. His courage failed him at the thought of walking over that trim lawn and knocking at that closed front door. He would slip around by the back way. Perhaps, who knew, he might come upon Joey without running the gauntlet of his sister's cold, offended eyes. If he might only find the boy and talk to him for a little while without betraying his identity, meet his son's clear gaze without the danger of finding scorn or fear in it, his heart beat high at the thought. He walked furtively up the back way between high, screening hedges of spruce. When he came to the gate of the yard he paused. He heard voices just beyond the thick hedge, children's voices, and he crept as near as he could to the sound and peered through the hedge, with a choking sensation in his throat and a smart in his eyes. Was that Joey? Could that be his little son? Yes, it was. He would have known him anywhere by his likeness to Emily. Their boy had her curly brown hair, her sensitive mouth, above all, her clear-gazing, truthful gray eyes, eyes in which there was never a shadow of falsehood or faltering. Joey Churchill was sitting on a stone bench in his aunt's kitchen yard, holding one of his black-stockinged knees between his small brown hands. Jimmy Morris was standing opposite him, his back braced against the trunk of a big, pink-blossomed apple tree, his hands in his pockets and a scowl on his freckled face. Jimmy lived next door to Joey, and as a rule they were very good friends, but this afternoon they had quarreled over the right and proper way to construct an Indian ambush in the fir grove behind the pig house. The argument was long and warm, and finally culminated in personalities. Just as John Churchill dropped on one knee behind the hedge, the better to see Joey's face, Jimmy Morris said scornfully, "I don't care what you say. Nobody believes you. Your father is in the penitentiary." The taunt struck home, as it always did. It was not the first time that Joey had been twitted with his father by his boyish companions, but never before by Jimmy. It always hurt him, and he had never before made any response to it. His face would flush crimson, his lips would quiver, and his big gray eyes darken miserably with the shadow that was on his life. He would turn away in silence. But that Jimmy, his best beloved chum, should say such a thing to him! Oh, it hurt terribly. There is nothing so merciless as a small boy. Jimmy saw his advantage and vindictively pursued it. "Your father stole money, that's what he did. You know he did." "I'm pretty glad my father isn't a thief. Your father is." "When he gets out of prison he'll go on stealing again. My father says he will. Nobody'll have anything to do with him, my father says. His own sister won't have anything to do with him. So there, Joey Churchill." "There will be somebody have something to do with him!" cried Joey hotly. He slid off the bench and faced Jimmy proudly and confidently. The unseen watcher on the other side of the hedge saw his face grow white and intense and set-lipped, as if it had been the face of a man. The gray eyes were alight with a steady, fearless glow. "I'll have something to do with him. He is my father, and I love him. I don't care what he did. I love him just as well as if he was the best man in the world. I love him better than if he was as good as your father, because he needs it more. I've always loved him ever since I found out about him. I'd write him and tell him so if Aunt Beatrice would tell me where to send the letter. Aunt Beatrice won't ever talk about him or let me talk about him, but I think about him all the time. And he's going to be a good man yet. Yes, he is, just as good as your father, Jimmy Morris. I'm going to make him good. I made up my mind years ago what I would do, and I'm going to do it. So there, Jimmy." "I don't see what you can do," muttered Jimmy, already ashamed of what he had said and wishing he had let Joey's father alone. "I'll tell you what I can do." Joey was confronting all the world now, with his head thrown back and his face flushed with his earnestness. "I can love him and stand by him, and I will. When he gets out of prison, he'll come to see me. I know he will. And I'm just going to hug him and kiss him and say, 'Never mind, Father. I know you're sorry for what you've done, and you're never going to do it any more. You're going to be a good man, and I'm going to stand by you. Yes, sir. That's just what I'm going to say to him. I'm all the children he has, and there's nobody else to love him, because I know Aunt Beatrice doesn't, and I'm going with him, wherever he goes.'" "You can't," said Jimmy in a scared tone. "Your Aunt Beatrice won't let you." "Yes, she will. She'll have to. I belong to my father, and I think he'll be coming pretty soon some way. I'm pretty sure the time must be most up. I wish he would come. I want to see him as much as can be, 'cause I know he'll need me. And I'll be proud of him yet, Jimmy Morris. Yes, I'll be just as proud as you are of your father. When I get bigger nobody will call my father names, I can tell you. I'll fight them if they do. Yes, sir, I will. My father and I are going to stand by each other like bricks. Aunt Beatrice has lots of children of her own, and I don't believe she'll be a bit sorry when I go away. She's ashamed of my father 'cause he did a bad thing. But I'm not, no, sir. I'm going to love him so much that I'll make up to him for everything else. And you can just go home, Jimmy Morris, so there." Jimmy Morris went home, and when he had gone Joey flung himself face downward in the grass and fallen apple blossoms, and lay very still. On the other side of the spruce hedge knelt John Churchill with bowed head. The tears were running freely down his face, but there was a new, tender light in his eyes. The bitterness and despair had fallen out of his heart, leaving a great peace and a dawning hope in their place. Bless that little loyal soul! There was something to live for after all. There was a motive to make the struggle worth while. He must justify his son's faith in him. He must strive to make himself worthy of this sweet, pure, unselfish love that was offered to him, as a divine draught is offered to the parched lips of a man perishing from thirst. Aye, and God helping him, he would. He would redeem the past. He would go West, but under his own name. His little son should go with him. He would work hard. He would pay back the money he had embezzled, as much of it as he could, if it took the rest of his life to do so. For his boy's sake he must cleanse his name from the dishonor he had brought on it. Oh, thank God, there was somebody to care, somebody to love him, somebody to believe him when he said humbly, "I repent." Under his breath he said, looking heavenward, "God be merciful to me, a sinner." Then he stood up erectly, went through the gate, and over the grass to the motionless little figure with its face buried in its arms. "Joey boy," he said huskily, "Joey boy." Joey sprang to his feet with tears still glistening in his eyes. He saw before him a bent, gray-headed man looking at him lovingly and wistfully. Joey knew who it was, the father he had never seen. With a glad cry of welcome he sprang into the outstretched arms of the man whom his love had already won back to God. End of The Redemption of John Churchill. Recording by Jean Bascom, Potomac, Maryland.
Story 25 of Lucy Maud Montgomery's Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Vince D. Lucy Maud Montgomery's Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 25. The Schoolmaster's Letters. At sunset, the schoolmaster went up to his room to write a letter to her. He always wrote to her at the same time, when the red wave of the sunset, flaming over the sea, surged in at the little curtainless window and flowed over the pages he wrote on. The light was rose-red and imperial and spiritual, like his love for her, and seemed almost to dye the words of the letters in its own splendid hues. The letters to her which she never was to see, whose words her eyes never were to read, and whose love and golden fancy and rainbow dreams never were to be so much as known by her. And it was because she never was to see them that he dared to write them, straight out of his full heart, taking the exquisite pleasure of telling her what he never could permit himself to tell her face to face. Every evening he wrote thus to her, and the hours so spent glorified the entire day. The rest of the hours, all the other hours of the commonplace day, he was merely a poor schoolmaster with a long struggle before him, one who might not lift his eyes to gaze on a star. But at this hour he was her equal, meeting her soul to soul, telling out as a man might all his great love for her, and wearing the jewel of it on his brow. What wonder, indeed, that the precious hour which made him a king, crowned with a mighty and unselfish passion, was above all things sacred to him, and doubly sacred when, as tonight, it followed upon an hour spent with her. Its mingled delight and pain were almost more than he could bear. He went through the kitchen and the hall, and up the narrow staircase, with a glory in his eyes that thus were held from seeing his sordid surroundings. Link Hausman, sprawled out on the platform before the kitchen door, saw him pass with that rapt face, and chuckled. Link was ill enough to look at any time, with his sharp, freckled features and foxy eyes. When he chuckled, his face was that of an unholy imp. But the schoolmaster took no heed of him. Neither did he heed the girl whom he met in the hall. Her handsome, sullen face flushed crimson under the sting of his utter disregard, and her black eyes followed him up the stairs with a look that was not good to see. "Sis," whispered Link piercingly, "come out here. I've got a joke to tell you, something about the master and his girl. You ain't to let on to him, you know, though. I found it out last night when he was off to the shore. That old key of Uncle Jim's was just the thing. He's a softy, and no mistake." Upstairs, in his little room, the schoolmaster was writing his letter. The room was as bare and graceless as all the other rooms of the farmhouse where he had boarded during his term of teaching, but it looked out on the sea, and was hung with such priceless tapestry of his iris dreams and visions that it was to him an apartment in a royal palace. From it he gazed afar on bays that were like great cups of sapphire brimming over with ruby wine for gods to drain, on headlands that were like amethyst, on wide sweeps of sea that were blue and far and mysterious. And ever the moan and call of the ocean's heart came up to his heart as of one great, hopeless love and longing crying out to another love and longing as great and hopeless. And here, in the rose radiance of the sunset, with the sea music in the dim air, he wrote his letter to her. "My lady, how beautiful it is to think there is nothing to prevent my loving you. There is much, everything, to prevent me from telling you I love you, but nothing has any right to come between my heart and its own. It is permitted to love you forever and ever, and serve and reverence you in secret and silence. For so much, dear, I thank life, even though the price of the permission must always be the secret and the silence. I have just come from you, my lady. Your voice is still in my ears. Your eyes are still looking into mine, gravely yet half smilingly, sweetly yet half provokingly. Oh, how dear and human and girlish and queenly you are! Half saint and half very womanly woman. And how I love you with all there is of me to love. Heart and soul and brain, every fiber of my body and spirit thrilling to the wonder and marvel and miracle of it. You do not know it, my sweet, and you must never know it. You would not even wish to know it, for I am nothing to you but one of many friends, coming into your life briefly and passing out of it, of no more account to you than a sunshiny hour, a bird's song, a bursting bud in your garden. But the hour and the bird and the flower gave you a little delight in their turn, and when you remembered them once more before forgetting, that was their reward and blessing. That is all I ask, dear lady, and I ask that only in my own heart. I am content to love you and be forgotten. It is sweeter to love you and be forgotten than it would be to love any other woman and live in her lifelong remembrance. So humble has love made me, sweet, so great is my sense of my own unworthiness. Yet love must find expression in some fashion, dear, else it is only pain, and hence these letters to you, which you will never read. I put all my heart into them. They are the best and highest of me. the buds of a love that can never bloom openly in the sunshine of your life. I weave a chaplet of them, dear, and crown you with it. They will never fade, for such love is eternal. It is a whole summer since I first met you. I had been waiting for you all my life before, and did not know it, but I knew it when you came and brought with you a sense of completion and fulfillment. This has been the precious year of my life, the turning point to which all things past tended, and all things future must look back. Oh, my dear, I thank you for this year. It has been your royal gift to me, and I shall be rich and great forever because of it. Nothing can ever take it from me, nothing can mar it. It were well to have lived a lifetime of loneliness for such a boon. The price would not be too high. I would not give my one perfect summer for a generation of other men's happiness. There are those in the world who would laugh at me, who would pity me, Una. They would say that the love I have poured out in secret at your feet has been wasted, that I am a poor, weak fool to squander all my treasure of affection on a woman who does not care for me, and who is as far above me as that great white star that is shining over the sea. Oh, my dear, they do not know. They cannot understand. The love I have given you has not left me poorer. It has enriched my life unspeakably. It has opened my eyes and given me the gift of clear vision for those things that matter. It has been a lamp held before my stumbling feet, whereby I have avoided snares and pitfalls of baser passions and unworthy dreams. For all this I thank you, dear, and for all this surely the utmost that I can give of love and reverence and service is not too much. I could not have helped loving you, but if I could have helped it, knowing with just what measure of pain and joy it would brim my cup, I would have chosen to love you, Una. There are those who strive to forget a helpless love. To me, the greatest misfortune that life could bring would be that I should forget you. I want to remember you always and love you and long for you. That would be unspeakably better than any happiness that could come to me through forgetting. Dear lady, good night. The sun has set. There is now but one fiery dimple on the horizon, as if a golden finger had dented it. Now it is gone. The mists are coming up over the sea. A kiss on each of your white hands, dear. Tonight I am too humble to lift my thoughts to your lips. The schoolmaster folded up his letter and held it against his cheek for a little space while he gazed out on the silver shining sea with his dark eyes full of dreams. Then he took from his shabby trunk a little inlaid box and unlocked it with a twisted silver key. It was full of letters, his letters to Una. The first had been written months ago in the early promise of a northern spring. They linked together the golden weeks of the summer. Now, in the purple autumn, the box was full and the schoolmaster's term was nearly ended. He took out the letters reverently and looked over them, now and then murmuring below his breath some passages scattered through the written pages. He had laid bare his heart in those letters, writing out what he never could have told her, even if his love had been known and returned. For dead and gone generations of stern and repressed forefathers laid their unyielding fingers of reserve on his lips, and the shyness of dreamy, book-bred youth stemmed the language of eye and tone. I will love you forever and ever, and even though you know it not, surely such love will hover around you all your life, like an invisible benediction, not understood but dimly felt, guarding you from ill and keeping far from you all things and thoughts of harm and evil. Sometimes I let myself dream, and in those dreams you love me, and we go out to meet life together. I have dreamed that you kissed me, dreamed it so reverently that the dream did your womanhood no wrong. I have dreamed that you put your hands in mine and said, "I love you." Oh, the rapture of it! We may give all we will if we do not ask for a return. There should be no barter in love. If by reason of the greatness of my love for you I were to ask your love in return, I should be a base creature. It is only because I am content to love and serve for the sake of loving and serving that I have the right to love you. I have a memory of a blush of yours, a rose of the years that will bloom forever in my garden of remembrance. Tonight you blushed when I came upon you suddenly among the flowers. You were startled. Perhaps I had broken too rudely on some girlish musing, and straightway your round, pale curve of cheek and your white arch of brow were made rosy as with the dawn of beautiful sunrise. I shall see you forever as you looked at that time. In my mad moments I shall dream, knowing all the while that it is only a dream, that you blushed with delight at my coming. I shall be able to picture forevermore how you would look at one you loved. Tonight the moon was low in the west. It hung over the sea like a shallop of ruddy gold moored to a star in the harbor of the night. I lingered long and watched it, for I knew that you too were watching it from your window that looks on the sea. You told me once that you always watched the moon set. It has been a bond between us ever since. This morning I rose at dawn and walked on the shore to think of you, because it seemed the most fitting time. It was before sunrise, and the world was virgin. All the east was a shimmer of silver, and the morning star floated in it like a dissolving pearl. The sea was a great miracle. I walked up and down by it, and said your name over and over again. The hour was sacred to you. It was as pure and unspoiled as your own soul. Una, who will bring into your life the sunrise splendor and color of love? Do you know how beautiful you are, Una? Let me tell you, dear, you are tall, yet you have to lift your eyes a little to meet mine. Such dear eyes, Una. They are dark blue, and when you smile they are like wet violets in sunshine. But when you are pensive, they are more lovely still. The spirit and enchantment of the sea at twilight passes into them then. Your hair has the gloss and brownness of ripe nuts, and your face is always pale. Your lips have a trick of falling apart in a half smile when you listen. They told me before I knew you that you were pretty. Pretty! The word is cheap and tawdry. You are beautiful, with the beauty of a pearl or a star or a white flower. Do you remember our first meeting? It was one evening last spring. You were in your garden. The snow had not all gone, but your hands were full of pale, early flowers. You wore a white shawl over your shoulders and head. Your face was turned upward a little, listening to a robin's call in the leafless trees above you. I thought God had never made anything so lovely and love-deserving. I loved you from that moment, Una. This is your birthday. The world has been glad of you for 20 years. It is fitting that there have been bird songs and sunshine and blossom today, a great light and fragrance over land and sea. This morning I went far afield to a long, lonely valley lying to the west, girt round about with dim old pines, where feet of men seldom tread, and there I searched until I found some rare flowers meet to offer you. I sent them to you with a little book, an old book. A new book savoring of the shop and marketplace, however beautiful it might be, would not do for you. So I sent the book that was my mother's. She read it and loved it. The faded rose leaves she placed in it are there still. At first, dear, I almost feared to send it. Would you miss its meaning? Would you laugh a little at the shabby volume with its pencil marks and its rose leaves? But I knew you would not. I knew you would understand. Today I saw you with the child of your sister in your arms. I felt as the old painters must have felt when they painted their Madonnas. You bent over his shining golden head, and on your face was the mother passion and tenderness that is God's finishing touch to the beauty of womanhood. The next moment you were laughing with him, two children playing together. But I had looked upon you in that brief space. Oh, the pain and joy of it! It is so sweet, dear, to serve you a little, though it be only opening a door for you to pass through, or handing you a book or a sheet of music. Love wishes to do so much for the beloved. I can do so little for you, but that little is sweet. This evening I read to you the poem which you had asked me to read. You sat before me with your brown head leaning on your hands, and your eyes cast down. I stole dear glances at you between the lines. When I finished, I put a red, red rose from your garden between the pages and crushed the book close on it. That poem will always be dear to me, stained with the lifeblood of a rose-like hour. I do not know which is sweeter, your laughter or your sadness. When you laugh, you make me glad, but when you are sad, I want to share in your sadness and soothe it. I think I am nearer to you in your sorrowful moods. Today I met you by accident at the turn of the lane. Nothing told me you were coming, not even the wind that should have known. I was sad, and then all at once I saw you and wondered how I could have been sad. You walked past me with a smile, as if you had tossed me a rose. I stood and watched you out of sight. That meeting was the purple gift the day gave me. Today I tried to write a poem to you, Una, but I could not find words fine enough, as a lover could find no raiment dainty enough for his bride. The old words other men have used in singing to their loves seemed too worn and common for you. I wanted only new words, crystal clear, or colored only by the iris of the light, not words that had been steeped and stained with all the hues of other men's thoughts. So I burned the verses that were so unworthy of you. Una, some day you will love. You will watch for him. You will blush at his coming, be sad at his going. Oh, I cannot think of it. Today I saw you when you did not see me. I was walking on the shore, and as I came around a rock, you were sitting on the other side. I drew back a little and looked at you. Your hands were clasped over your knees. Your hat had fallen back, and the sea wind was ruffling your hair. Your face was lifted to the sky. Your lips were parted. Your eyes were full of light. You seemed to be listening to something that made you happy. I crept gently away, that I might not mar your dream. Of what were you thinking, Una? I must leave you soon. Sometimes I think I cannot bear it. Oh, Una, how selfish it is of me to wish that you might love me. Yet I do wish it, although I have nothing to offer you but a great love and all my willing work of hand and brain. If you loved me, I fear I should be weak enough to do you the wrong of wooing you. I want you so much, dear. The schoolmaster added the last letter to the others and locked the box. When he unlocked it again, 2 days later, the letters were gone. He gazed at the empty box with dilated eyes. At first he could not realize what had happened. The letters could not be gone. He must have made a mistake, have put them in some other place. With trembling fingers he ransacked his trunk. There was no trace of the letters. With a groan he dropped his face in his hands and tried to think. His letters were gone. Those precious letters, held almost too sacred for his own eyes to read after they were written, had been stolen from him. The inmost secrets of his soul had been betrayed. Who had done this hideous thing? He rose and went downstairs. In the farmyard he found Link tormenting his dog. Link was happy only when he was tormenting something. He never had been afraid of anything in his life before, but now absolute terror took possession of him at the sight of the schoolmaster's face. Physical strength and force had no power to frighten the sullen lad, But all the irresistible might of a fine soul roused to frenzy looked out in the young man's blazing eyes, dilated nostrils, and tense white mouth. It cowed the boy, because it was something he could not understand. He only realized that he was in the presence of a force that was not to be trifled with. "Link, where are my letters?" said the schoolmaster. "I didn't take 'em, master," cried Link, crumpling up visibly in his sheer terror. "I didn't. I never taked 'em. It was Sis. I told her not to. I told her you'd be awful mad, but she wouldn't tend to me. It was Sis took 'em. Ask her if you don't believe me." The schoolmaster believed him. Nothing was too horrible to believe just then. "What has she done with them?" he said hoarsely. She sent 'em to Una Clifford," whimpered Link. "I told her not to. She's mad at you 'cause you want to see Una and wouldn't go with her. She thought Una would be mad at you for writing 'em, 'cause the Cliffords are so proud and think themselves above everybody else. So she sent 'em. I told her not to." The schoolmaster said not another word. He turned his back on the whining boy and went to his room. He felt sick with shame. The indecency of the whole thing revolted him. It was as if his naked heart had been torn from his breast and held up to the jeers of a vulgar world by the merciless hand of a scorned and jealous woman. He felt stunned as if by a physical blow. After a time his fierce anger and shame died into a calm desperation. The deed was done, beyond recall. It only remained for him to go to Una, tell her the truth, and implore her pardon. Then he must go from her sight and presence forever. It was dusk when he went to her home. They told him that she was in the garden, and he found her there, standing at the curve of the box walk, among the last late-blooming flowers of the summer. Have you thought from his letters that she was a wonderful woman of marvelous beauty? Not so. She was a sweet and slender slip of girlhood, with girlhood's own charm and freshness. There were thousands like her in the world, thank God for it, but only one like her in one man's eyes. He stood before her, mute with shame, his boyish face white and haggard. She had blushed crimson all over her dainty paleness at sight of him, and laid her hand quickly on the breast of her white gown. Her eyes were downcast, and her breath came shortly. He thought her silence the silence of anger and scorn. He wished that he might fling himself in the dust at her feet. "Una, Miss Clifford, forgive me," he stammered miserably. I did not send them. I never meant that you should see them. A shameful trick has been played upon me. Forgive me." "For what am I to forgive you?" she asked gravely. She did not look up, but her lips parted in the little half-smile he loved. The blush was still on her face. "For my presumption," he whispered. I could not help loving you, Una. If you had read the letters, you know all the rest." "I have read the letters, every word," she answered, pressing her little hand a little more closely to her breast. "Perhaps I should not have done so, for I soon discovered that they were not meant for me to read. I thought at first you had sent them, although the writing of the address on the packet did not look like yours. But even when I knew you did not, I could not help reading them all. I do not know who sent them, but I am very grateful to the sender." "Grateful?" he said wonderingly. "Yes, I have something to forgive you, but not your presumption. It is your blindness, I think, and your cruel resolution to go away and never tell me of your love for me. If it had not been for the sending of these letters, I might never have known. How can I forgive you for that?" "Una," he said. He had been very blind, but he was beginning to see. He took a step nearer and took her hands. She threw up her head and gazed, blushingly, steadfastly, into his eyes. From the folds of her gown she drew forth the little packet of letters and kissed it. "Your dear letters," she said bravely. "They have given me the right to speak out. I will speak out. I love you, dear. I will be content to wait through long years until you can claim me. I have been so happy since your letters came." He put his arms round her and drew her head close to his. Their lips met. End of The Schoolmaster's Letters. Recording by Vince D.
Story 26 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christopher Most. I had 2 schools offered me that summer, one at Rocky Valley and one at Bayside. At first I inclined to Rocky Valley. It possessed a railway station and was nearer the centers of business and educational activity. But eventually I chose Bayside, thinking that its country quietude would be a good thing for a student who was making school teaching the stepping stone to a college course. I had reason to be glad of my choice, for in Bayside I met Uncle Dick. Ever since it has seemed to me that not to have known Uncle Dick would have been to miss a great sweetness and inspiration from my life. He was one of those rare souls whose friendship is at once a pleasure and a benediction, showering light from their own crystal clearness into all the dark corners in the souls of others until, for the time being at least, they reflected his own simplicity and purity. Uncle Dick could no more help bringing delight into the lives of his associates than could the sunshine or the west wind or any other of the best boons of nature. I had been in Bayside 3 weeks before I met him, although his farm adjoined the one where I boarded, and I passed at a little distance from his house every day in my short cut across the fields to school. I even passed his garden unsuspectingly for a week, never dreaming that behind that rank of leafy, rustling poplars lay a veritable God's acre of loveliness and fragrance. But one day as I went by, a whiff of something sweeter than the odors of Araby brushed my face, and following the wind that had blown it through the poplars, I went up to the white paling and found there a trellis of honeysuckle, and beyond it Uncle Dick's garden. Thereafter I daily passed close by the fence that I might have the privilege of looking over it. It would be hard to define the charm of that garden. It did not consist in order or system, for there was no trace of either, except, perhaps, in that prim row of poplars growing along the whole domain and shutting it away from all idle and curious eyes. For the rest, I think that the real charm must have been in its unexpectedness. At every turn and in every nook you stumbled on some miracle of which you had never dreamed. Or perhaps the charm was simply that the whole garden was an expression of Uncle Dick's personality. In one corner a little green dory filled with earth overflowed in a way of gay annuals. In the center of the garden an old birch-bark canoe seemed sailing through a sea of blossoms, with a many-colored freight of geraniums. Paths twisted and turned among flowering shrubs, and clumps of old-fashioned perennials were mingled with the latest fads of the floral catalogues. The mid-garden was a pool of sunshine, with finely sifted winds purring over it, but under the poplars there were shadows and growing things that loved the shadows, crowding about the old stone benches at each side. Somehow my daily glimpse of Uncle Dick's garden soon came to symbolize for me a meaning easier to translate into life and soul than into words. It was a power for good within me, making its influence felt in many ways. Finally I caught Uncle Dick in his garden. On my way home one evening I found him on his knees among the rose bushes, and as soon as he saw me he sprang up and came forward with outstretched hand. He was a tall man of about 50, with grizzled hair, but not a thread of silver yet showed itself in the ripples of his long brown beard. Later I discovered that his splendid beard was Uncle Dick's only vanity. So fine and silky was it that it did not hide the candid, sensitive curves of his mouth, around which a mellow smile, tinged with kindly, quizzical humor, always lingered. His face was tanned even more deeply than is usual among farmers, for he had an inveterate habit of going about hatless in the most merciless sunshine, but the line of forehead under his hair was white as milk, and his eyes were darkly blue and as tender as a woman's. "How do you do, master?" he said heartily. The Bayside pedagogue were invariably addressed as master by young and old. "I'm glad to see you. Here I am, trying to save my rose bushes. There are green bugs on 'em, master. Green bugs, and they're worrying the life out of me." I smiled, for Uncle Dick looked very unlike a worrying man, even over such a serious accident as green bugs. "Your roses don't seem to mind, Mr. Oliver," I said. "They are the finest I have ever seen." The compliment to his roses, well deserved as it was, did not at first engage his attention. He pretended to frown at me. "Don't get into any bad habit of mistering me, master," he said. You'd better begin by calling me Uncle Dick from the start, and then you won't have the trouble of changing, because it would come to that. It always does. But come in, come in. There's a gate round here. I want to get acquainted with you. I have a taste for schoolmasters. I didn't possess it when I was a boy. A glint of fun appeared in his blue eyes. It's an acquired taste. I accepted his invitation and went, not only into his garden, but, as was proved later, into his confidence and affection. He linked his arm with mine, and piloted me about to show me his pets. "I potter about this garden considerable," he said. "It pleases the women folks to have lots of posies." I laughed, for Uncle Dick was a bachelor, and considered to be a hopeless one. "Don't laugh, master," he said, pressing my arm. "I've no women folk of my own about me now, 'tis true, but all the girls in the district come to Uncle Dick when they want flowers for their little diversions. Besides, perhaps, sometimes—" Uncle Dick broke off and stood in the brown study, looking at an old stump aflame with nasturtiums for fully 3 minutes. Later on I was to learn the significance of that pause and reverie. I spent the whole evening with Uncle Dick. After we had explored the garden he took me into his house and into his den. The house was a small white one, and wonderfully neat inside, considering the fact that Uncle Dick was his own housekeeper. His den was a comfortable place, its one window so shadowed by a huge poplar that the room had a grotto-like effect of emerald gloom. I came to know it well, for, at Uncle Dick's invitation, I did my studying there and browsed at will among his classics. We soon became close friends. Uncle Dick had always chummed with the masters, as he said, but our friendship went deeper. For my own part, I preferred his company to that of any young man I knew. There was a perennial spring of youth in Uncle Dick's soul that yet had all the fascinating flavor of ripe experience. He was clever, kindly, humorous, and withal so crystal clear of mind and heart that an atmosphere partaking of childhood hung about him. I knew Uncle Dick's outward history as the Bayside people knew it. It was not a very eventful one. He had lost his father in boyhood. Before that there had been some idea of Dick's going to college. After his father's death he seemed quietly to have put all such hopes away and settled down to look after the farm and take care of his invalid stepmother. This woman, as I learned from the others, but never from Uncle Dick, had been a peevish, fretful, exacting creature, and for nearly 30 years Uncle Dick had been a very slave to her whims and caprices. "Nobody knows what he had to put up with, for he never complained," Mrs. Lindsay, my landlady, told me. "She was out of her mind once, and she was liable to go out of it again if she was crossed in anything. He was that good and patient with her. She was dreadful fond of him, too, for all she did almost worry his life out. No doubt she was the reason he never married. He couldn't leave her, and he knew no woman would go in there. Uncle Dick never courted anyone unless it was Rose Lawrence. She was a cousin of my man's. I've heard he had a kindness for her. It was years ago, before I came to Bayside, but anyway, nothing came of it. Her father's health failed, and he had to go out to California. Rose had to go with him, her mother being dead, and that was the end of Uncle Dick's love affair." But that was not the end of it, as I discovered when Uncle Dick gave me his confidence. One evening I went over, and, piloted by the sound of shrieks and laughter, found Uncle Dick careering about the garden, pursued by half a dozen schoolgirls who were pelting him with overblown roses. At the sight of the master my pupils instantly became prim and demure, and gathering up their flowery spoil, they beat a hasty retreat down the lane. "Those girls are very sweet," said Uncle Dick abruptly. "Little blossoms of life. Have you ever wondered, master, why I haven't some of my own blooming about the old place instead of just looking over the fence of other men's gardens, coveting their human roses?" "Yes, I have," I answered frankly. "It's been a puzzle to me why you, Uncle Dick, who seemed to me fitted above all men I have ever known for love and husbandhood and fatherhood, should have elected to live your life alone." "It has not been a matter of choice," said Uncle Dick gently. "We can't always order our lives as we would, master. I loved a woman once, and she loved me, and we love each other still. Do you think I could bear life else? I've an interest in it that the Bayside folk know nothing of. It has kept youth in my heart and joy in my soul through long, lonely years, and it's not ended yet, master. It's not ended yet. Some day I hope to bring a wife here to my old house. My wife, my rose of joy." He was silent for a space, gazing at the stars. I, too, kept silence, fearing to intrude in the holy places of his thought, although I was tingling with interest in this unsuspected outflowering of romance in Uncle Dick's life. After a time he said gently, "Shall I tell you about it, master? I mean, do you care to know?" "Yes," I answered, "I do care to know, and I shall respect your confidence, Uncle Dick."
"I know that. I couldn't tell you otherwise," he said. "I don't want the Bayside folk to know. It would be kind of a desecration. They would laugh and joke with me about it as they tease other people, and I couldn't bear that. Nobody in Bayside knows or suspects unless it's old Joe Hammond at the post office, and he has kept my secret, or what he knows of it. But somehow I feel I'd like to tell you, Master. 25 years ago I loved Rose Lawrence. The Lawrences lived where you are boarding now. There was just the father, a sickly man, and Rose, my Rose of joy, as I called her, for I knew my Emerson pretty well even then. She was sweet and fair, like a white rose with just a hint of pink in its cup. We loved each other, but we couldn't marry then. My mother was an invalid, and at one time, before I had learned to care for Rose, she, the mother, had asked me to promise her that I'd never marry as long as she lived. She didn't think then that she would live long, but she lived for 20 years, Master, and she held me to my promise all the time. Yes, it was hard, for I had given an indignant exclamation, but you see, Master, I had promised, and I had to keep my word. Rose said I was right in doing it. She said she was willing to wait for me, but she didn't know it, poor girl, how long the waiting was to be. Then her father's health failed completely, and the doctor ordered him to another climate. They went to California. That was a hard parting, Master. But we promised each other that we would be true, and we have been. I've never seen my Rose of joy since then, but I've had a letter from her every week. When the mother died 5 years ago, I wanted to move to California and marry Rose. But she wrote that her father was so poorly that she couldn't marry me yet. She has to wait on him every minute, and he's restless, and they move here and there. A hard life for my poor girl. So I had to take a new lease of patience, Master. One learns how to wait in 20 years. But I shall have her some day, God willing. Our love will be crowned yet. So I wait, Master, and try to keep my life and soul clean and wholesome and young for her. That's my story, Master, and will not say anything more about it just now, for I dare say you don't exactly know what to say. But at times I'll talk of her to you, and that will be a rare pleasure for me. And I think that's why I wanted you to know about her."
He did talk often to me of her, and I soon came to realize what this far-away woman meant in his life. She was for him the center of everything. His love was strong, pure, and idyllic, the ideal love of which the loftiest poets sing. It glorified his whole inner life with a strange, unfailing radiance. I found that everything he did was done with an eye single to what she would think of it when she came. Especially did he put his love into his garden.
"Every flower in it stands for a thought of her, Master," he said. "It is a great joy to think that she will walk in this garden with me some day. It will be complete then. My Rose of joy will be here to crown it."
That summer and winter passed away, and when spring came again, lettering her footsteps with violets in the meadows, and waking all the sleeping loveliness of old homestead gardens, Uncle Dick's long-deferred happiness came with her. One evening when I was in our den, mid-deep in study of old things that seemed musty and unattractive enough in contrast with the vivid, new-born out-of-doors, Uncle Dick came home from the post-office with an open letter in his hand. His big voice trembled as he said,
"Master, she's coming home. Her father is dead, and she has nobody in the world now but me. In a month she will be here. Don't talk to me of it yet. I want to taste the joy of it in silence for a while."
He hastened away to his garden, and walked there until darkness fell, with his face uplifted to the sky, and the love-rapture of countless generations shining in his eyes. Later on, we sat on one of the old stone benches, and Uncle Dick tried to talk practically. Bayside people soon found out that Rose Lawrence was coming home to marry Uncle Dick. Uncle Dick was much teased and suffered for it seemed, as he had said, desecration. But the real goodwill and kindly feeling in the banter redeemed it. He went to the station to meet Rose Lawrence the day she came. When I went home from school, Mrs. Lindsay told me on the phone that she was in the parlor and took me in to be introduced. I was bitterly disappointed. Somehow I expected to meet, not indeed a young girl palpitating with youthful bloom, but a woman of ripe maturity, dowered with the beauty of harmonious middle age, the feminine counterpart of Uncle Dick. Instead, I found in Rose Lawrence a small, faded woman of 45, gowned in shabby black. She had evidently been very pretty once, but bloom and grace were gone. Her face had a sweet and gentle expression, but was tired and worn, and her fair hair was plentifully streaked with gray. Alas, I thought compassionately, for Uncle Dick's dreams. What a shock the change to her must have given him! Could this be the woman on whom he had lavished such a life wealth of love and reverence? I tried to talk to her, but I found her shy and timid. She seemed to me uninteresting and commonplace. And this was Uncle Dick's Rose of Joy! I was so sorry for Uncle Dick that I shrank from meeting him. Nevertheless, I went over after tea, fearing that he might misunderstand, nay, rather, understand my absence. He was in the garden, and he came down the path where the buds were just showing. There was a smile on his face, and the glory in his eyes was quite undimmed.
Master, she's come, and she's not a bit changed. I feared she would be, but she is just the same, my sweet Rose of Joy.
I looked at Uncle Dick in some amazement. He was thoroughly sincere, there was no doubt of that, and I felt a great throb of relief. He had found no disillusioning change. I found Rose Lawrence merely with the cold eyes of a stranger. He saw her through the transfiguring medium of a love that made her truly his Rose of Joy. And all was well. They were married the next morning and walked over the clover meadow to their home. In the evening I went over, as I had promised Uncle Dick to do. They were in the garden, with a great saffron sky over them and a glory of sunset behind the poplars. I paused unseen at the gate. Uncle Dick was big and splendid in his fine new wedding suit, and his faded little bride was hanging on his arm. Her face was upturned to him. It was a glorified face, so transformed by the tender radiance of love shining through it, that I saw her then as Uncle Dick must always see her, and no longer found it hard to understand how she could be his Rose of Joy. Happiness clothed them as a garment. They were crowned king and queen in the bridal realm of the springtime. End of The Story of Uncle Dick, recorded by Christopher Most.
Story 27 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jadapi. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 27. The Understanding of Sister Sarah. June 1st. I began this journal last New Year's, wrote 2 entries in it, and then forgot all about it. I came across it today in a rummage. Sarah insists on my cleaning things out thoroughly every once in so long, and I'm going to keep it up. I feel the need of a confidant of some kind, even if it is only an inanimate journal. I have no other, and I cannot talk my thoughts over with Sarah. She's so unsympathetic. Sarah is a dear, good soul, and I love her as much as she will let me. I am also very grateful to her. She brought me up when our mother died. No doubt she had a hard time of it, poor dear, for I never was easily brought up, perversely preferring to come up in my own way. But Sarah did her duty unflinchingly and, well, it's not for me to say that the result does her credit, but it really does, considering the material she had to work with. I'm a bundle of faults as it is, but I tremble to think what I would have been if there had been no Sarah. Yes, I love Sarah, and I'm grateful to her, but she doesn't understand me in the least. Perhaps it is because she is so much older than I am, but it doesn't seem to me that Sarah could really ever have been young. She laughs at things I consider the most sacred and calls me a romantic girl, in a tone of humorous toleration. I am chilled and thrown back on myself, and the dreams and confidences I'm bubbling over with have no outlet. Sarah couldn't understand. She is so practical. When I go to her with some beautiful thought I have found in a book or poem, she is quite likely to say, "Yes, yes, but I noticed this morning that the braid was loose on your skirt, Beatrice. Better go and sew it on before you forget again. A stitch in time saves 9." When I come home from a concert or lecture yearning to talk over the divine music or the wonderful new ideas with her, she will say, "Yes, yes, but you are sure you didn't get your feet damp? Better go and change your stockings, my dear. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." So I have given up trying to talk things over with Sarah. This old journal will be better. Last night Sarah and I went to Mrs. Trent's musicale. I had to sing, and I had the loveliest new gown for the occasion. At first Sarah thought my old blue dress would do. She said we must economize this summer and told me I was entirely too extravagant in the matter of clothes. I cried about it after I went to bed. Sarah looked at me very sharply the next morning without saying anything. In the afternoon she went uptown and bought some lovely pale yellow silk organdy. She made it up herself. Sarah is a genius at dressmaking, and it was the prettiest gown at the musicale. Sarah wore her old gray silk made over. Sarah doesn't care anything about dress, but then she is 40. Walter Shirley was at the Trents. The Shirleys are a new family here. They moved to Atwater 2 months ago. Walter is the oldest son, and has been at college in Marlborough all winter, so that nobody here knew him until he came home a fortnight ago. He is very handsome and distinguished looking, and everybody says he is so clever. He plays the violin just beautifully, and has such a melting, sympathetic voice, and the loveliest deep, dark, inscrutable eyes. I asked Sarah when we came home if she didn't think he was splendid. "He'd be a nice boy if he wasn't rather conceited," said Sarah. After that it was impossible to say anything more about Mr. Shirley. I am glad he's going to be in Atwater all summer. We have so few really nice young men here. They go away just as soon as they grow up, and those who stay are just the muffs. I wonder if I shall see Mr. Shirley soon again. June 30th. It does not seem possible that it is only a month since my last entry. It seems more like a year, a delightful year. I can't believe that I am the same Beatrice Mason who wrote then. And I'm not, either. She was just a simple little girl, knowing nothing but romantic dreams. I feel that I am very much changed. Life seems so grand and high and beautiful. I want to be a true, noble woman. Only such a woman could be worthy of a fine, noble man. But when I tried to say something like this to Sarah, she replied calmly, "My dear child, the average woman is quite good enough for the average man. If she can cook his meals decently and keep his buttons sewed on and doesn't nag him, he will think that life is a pretty comfortable affair. And that reminds me, I saw holes in your black lace stockings yesterday. Better go and darn them at once. Procrastination is the thief of time." Sarah cannot understand. Blanche Lawrence was married yesterday to Ted Martin. I thought it the most solemn and sacred thing I had ever listened to. The marriage ceremony, I mean. I had never thought much about it before. I don't see how Blanche could care anything for Ted. He is so stout and dumpy, with shallow blue eyes and a little pale mustache. I must say I do not like fair men, but there is no doubt that he and Blanche love each other devotedly, and that fact sufficed to make the service very beautiful to me. Those two people pledging each other to go through life together, meeting its storm and sunshine hand in hand, thinking joy the sweeter because they shared it, finding sorrow sacred because it came to them both. When Sarah and I walked home from the church, Sarah said, "Well, considering the chances she has had, Blanche Lawrence hasn't done so well after all." "Oh, Sarah," I cried, "she has married the man she loves and who loves her. What better is there to do? I thought it beautiful." "They should have waited another year at least," said Sarah severely. "Ted Martin has only been practicing law for a year, and he had nothing to begin with. He can't have made enough in 1 year in Atwater to justify him in setting up housekeeping. I think a man ought to be ashamed of himself to take a girl from a good home to an uncertainty like that." "Not if she loved him and was willing to share the uncertainty," I said softly. "Love won't pay the butcher's bill," said Sarah with a sniff, "and landlords have an unfeeling preference for money over affection. Besides, Blanche is a mere child, far too young to be burdened with the responsibilities of life." Blanche is 20, 2 years older than I am, but Sarah talks as if I were a mere infant. July 30th. Oh, I am so happy. I wonder if there is another girl in the world as happy as I am tonight. No, of course there cannot be, because there is only one Walter. Walter and I are engaged. It happened last night when we were sitting out in the moonlight under the silver maple on the lawn. I cannot write down what he said. The words are too sacred and beautiful to be kept anywhere but in my own heart forever and ever as long as I live. And I don't remember just what I said, but we understood each other perfectly at last. Of course Sara had to do her best to spoil things. Just as Walter had taken my hand in his and bent forward with his splendid, earnest eyes just burning into mine, and my heart was beating so furiously, Sara came to the front door and called out, "Beatrice, Beatrice, have you your rubbers on? And don't you think it is too damp out there for you in that heavy dew? Better come into the house, both of you. Walter has a cold now." "Oh, we'll be in soon, Sara," I said impatiently. But we didn't go in for an hour, and when we did Sara was cross, and after Walter had gone she told me I was a very silly girl to be so reckless of my health and risk getting pneumonia loitering out in the dew with a sentimental boy. I had had some vague thoughts of telling Sara all about my new happiness, for it was so great I wanted to talk it over with somebody, but I couldn't after that. Oh, I wish I had a mother. She could understand. But Sara cannot. Walter and I have decided to keep our engagement a secret for a month. Just our own beautiful secret, unshared by anyone. Then, before he goes back to college, he is going to tell Sara and ask her consent. I don't think Sara will refuse it exactly. She really likes Walter very well. But I know she will be horrid and I just dread it. She will say I am too young, and that a boy like Walter has no business to get engaged until he is through college, and that we haven't known each other long enough to know anything about each other, and that we are only a pair of romantic children. And after she has said all this and given a disapproving consent, she will begin to train me up in the way a good housekeeper should go, and talk to me about table linen, and the best way to manage a range, and how to tell if a chicken is really a chicken or only an old hen. Oh, I know Sara. She will set the teeth of my spirit on edge a dozen times a day and rub all the bloom off my dear, only little romance with her horrible practicalities. I know one must learn about those things, of course, and I do want to make Walter's home the best and dearest and most comfortable spot on earth for him, and be the very best little wife and housekeeper I can be when the time comes. But I want to dream my dreams first, and Sara will wake me up so early to realities. This is why we determined to keep 1 month sacred to ourselves. Walter will graduate next spring. He is to be a doctor, and then he intends to settle down at Atwater and work up a practice. I am sure he will succeed, for everyone likes him so much. But we are to be married as soon as he is through college, because he has a little money of his own, enough to set up housekeeping in a modest way with care and economy. I know Sara will talk about risk and waiting and all that just as she did in Ted Martin's case, but then Sara does not understand. Oh, I am so happy. It almost frightens me. I don't see how anything so wonderful can last. But it will last, for nothing can ever separate Walter and me, and as long as we are together and love each other, this great happiness will be mine. Oh, I want to be so good and noble for his sake. I want to make life one grand, sweet song. I have gone about the house today feeling like a woman consecrated and set apart from other women by Walter's love. Nothing could spoil it, not even when Sara scolded me for letting the preserves burn in the kettle because I forgot to stir them while I was planning out our life together. Sara said she really did not know what would happen to me some day if I was so careless and forgetful. But then Sara does not understand. August 20th. It is all over. Life is ended for me, and I do not know how I can face the desolate future. Walter and I have quarreled, and our engagement is broken. He is gone, and my heart is breaking. I hardly know how it began. I'm sure I never meant to flirt with Jack Ray. I never did flirt with him either, in spite of Walter's unmanly accusations. But Walter has been jealous of Jack all summer, although he knew perfectly well he needn't be, and 2 nights ago at the Morley dance poor Jack seemed so dull and unhappy that I tried to cheer him up a little and be kind to him. I danced with him 3 times and sat out another dance just to talk with him in a real sisterly fashion. But Walter was furious, and last night when he came up he said horrid things, things no girl of any spirit could endure, and things he could never have said to me if he had really cared one bit for me. We had a frightful quarrel, and when I saw plainly that Walter no longer loved me, I told him that he was free, and that I never wanted to see him again, and that I hated him. He glared at me and said that I should have my wish. I never should see him again, and he hoped he would never again meet such a faithless, fickle girl. Then he went away and slammed the front door. I cried all night. But today I went about the house singing. I would not for the world let other people know how Walter has treated me. I will hide my broken heart under a smiling face bravely. But oh, I am so miserable. Just as soon as I am old enough I mean to go away and be a trained nurse. There is nothing else left in life for me. Sarah does not suspect that anything is wrong, and I am so thankful she does not. She would not understand. September 6th. Today I read this journal over and thought I would burn it. It is so silly. But on second thought I concluded to keep it as a reminder of how blind and selfish I was and how good Sarah is. For I am happy again and everything is all right, thanks to Sarah. The very day after our quarrel Walter left Atwater. He did not have to return to college for 3 weeks, but he went to visit some friends down in Charlotteville, and I heard, Molly Roach told me, Molly Roach was always wild about Walter herself, that he was not coming back again, but would go right on to Marlborough from Charlotteville. I smiled squarely at Molly as if I didn't care a particle, but I can't describe how I felt. I knew then that I had really been hoping that something would happen in 3 weeks to make our quarrel up. In a small place like Atwater, people in the same set can't help meeting. But Walter had gone and I should never see him again. And what was worse, I knew he didn't care, or he wouldn't have gone. I bore it in silence for 3 weeks, but I will shudder to the end of my life when I remember those 3 weeks. Night before last, Sarah came up to my room, where I was lying on my bed with my face in the pillow. I wasn't crying. I couldn't cry. There was just a dreadful, dull ache in everything. Sarah sat down on the rocker in front of the window, and the sunset light came in behind her and made a sort of nimbus round her head, like a motherly saint's in a cathedral. "Beatrice," she said gently, "I want to know what the trouble is. You can't hide it from me that something is wrong. I've noticed it for some time. You don't eat anything and you cry all night. Oh, yes, I know you do. What is it, dear?" "Oh, Sarah!" I just gave a little cry, slipped from the bed to the floor, laid my head in her lap and told her everything. It was such a relief, and such a relief to feel those good motherly arms around me and to realize that here was a love that would never fail me, no matter what I did or how foolish I was. Sarah heard me out and then she said, without a word of reproach or contempt, "It will all come out right yet, dear. Write to Walter and tell him you are sorry." "Sarah, I never could. He doesn't love me any longer. He said he'd hoped he'd never see me again." "Didn't you say the same to him, child? He meant it as little as you did. Don't let your foolish pride keep you miserable." "If Walter won't come back to me without my asking him, he'll never come, Sarah," I said stubbornly. Sarah didn't scold or coax any more. She patted my head and kissed me and made me bathe my face and go to bed. Then she tucked me in just as she used to do when I was a little girl. "Now don't cry, dear," she said. "It will come right yet." Somehow I began to hope it would when Sarah thought so, and anyhow it was such a comfort to have talked it all over with her. I slept better than I had for a long time, and it was 7 o'clock yesterday morning when I woke to find that it was a dull gray day outside, and that Sarah was standing by my bed with her hat and jacket on. "I am going down to Junction Falls on the 7:30 train to see Mr. Conway about coming to fix the back kitchen floor," she said, "and I have some other business that may keep me for some time, so don't be anxious if I'm not back till late. Give the bread a good kneading in an hour's time and be careful not to bake it too much." That was a dismal day. It began to rain soon after Sarah left and it just poured. I never saw a soul all day except the milkman, and I was really frantic by night. I never was so glad of anything as when I heard Sarah step on the veranda. I flew to the front door to let her in, and there was Walter, all dripping wet, and his arms were about me, and I was crying on the shoulder of his mackintosh. I only guessed then what I knew later on. Sarah had heard from Mrs. Shirley that Walter was going to Marlborough that day without coming back to Atwater. Sarah knew that he must change trains at Junction Falls, and she went there to meet him. She didn't know what train he would come on, so she went to meet the earliest and had to wait till the last, hanging around the dirty little station at the falls all day while it poured rain. And she hadn't a thing to eat except some fancy biscuits she had bought on the train. But Walter came at last on the 7:50 train, and there was Sarah to pounce on him. He told me afterwards that no angel could have been so beautiful a vision to him as Sarah was, standing there on the wet platform, with her tweed skirt held up and a streaming umbrella over her head, telling him he must come back to Atwater because Beatrice wanted him to. But just at the moment of his coming, I didn't care how he had come or who had brought him. I just realized that he was there, and that was enough. Sarah came in behind him. Walter's wet arms were about me, and I was standing there with my thin, slippered feet in a little pool of water that dripped from his umbrella. But Sarah never said a word about colds and dampness. She just smiled, went on into the sitting room, and shut the door. Sarah understood. End of The Understanding of Sister Sarah. Recording by Jadapi. www.jadapi.wordpress.com.
Story 28 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 28, The Unforgotten One. It was Christmas Eve, but there was no frost, or snow, or sparkle. It was a green Christmas, and the night was mild and dim with hazy starlight. A little wind was laughing freakishly among the firs along Ingleside and rustling among the sere grasses along the garden walks. It was more like a night in early spring or late fall than in December, but it was Christmas Eve, and there was a light in every window of Ingleside, the glow breaking out through the whispering darkness like a flame-red blossom swung against the background of the evergreens, for the children were coming home for the Christmas reunion, as they always came. Fritz and Margaret and Laddie and Nora and Robert's two boys in the place of Robert, who had died 14 years ago, and the old house must put forth its best of light and good cheer to welcome them. Dr. Fritz and his brood were the last to arrive, driving up to the hall door amid a chorus of welcoming barks from the old dogs and a hail of merry calls from the group in the open doorway. "We're all here now," said the little mother, as she put her arms about the neck of her stalwart firstborn and kissed his bearded face. There were handshakings and greetings and laughter. Only Nanny, far back in the shadows of the firelit hall, swallowed a resentful sob and wiped two bitter tears from her eyes with her little red hand. "We're not all here," she muttered under her breath. "Miss Avis isn't here. Oh, how can they be so glad? How can they have forgotten?" But nobody heard or heeded Nanny. She was only the little orphan help girl at Ingleside. They were all very good to her, and they were all very fond of her, but at the times of family reunion Nanny was unconsciously counted out. There was no bond of blood to unite her to them, and she was left on the fringe of things. Nanny never resented this. It was all a matter of course to her. But on this Christmas Eve her heart was broken because she thought that nobody remembered Miss Avis. After supper they all gathered around the open fireplace of the hall, hung with its berries and evergreens, in honor of the morrow. It was their unwritten law to form a fireside circle on Christmas Eve, and tell each other what the year had brought them of good and ill, sorrow and joy. The circle was smaller by one than it had been the year before, but none spoke of that. There was a smile on every face and happiness in every voice. The father and mother sat in the center, gray-haired and placid, their fine old faces written over with the history of gracious lives. Beside the mother, Dr. Fritz sat like a boy on the floor, with his massive head, gray as his father's, on her lap, and one of his smooth, muscular hands, that were as tender as a woman's at the operating table, clasped in hers. Next to him sat sweet Nora, the 20-year-old baby who taught in a city school. The rosy firelight gleamed lovingly over her girlish beauty of burnished brown hair, dreamy blue eyes, and soft virginal curves of cheek and throat. Dr. Fritz's spare arm was about her, but Nora's own hands were clasped over her knee, and on one of them sparkled a diamond that had not been there at the last Christmas reunion. Laddie, who figured as Archibald only in the family Bible, sat close to the ingle nook, a handsome young fellow with daring brow and rollicking eyes. On the other side sat Margaret, hand in hand with her father, a woman whose gracious sweetness of nature enveloped her as a garment. And Robert's two laughing boys filled up the circle, looking so much alike that it was hard to say which was Cecil and which was Sid. Margaret's husband and Fritz's wife were playing games with the children in the parlor, whence shrieks of merriment drifted out into the hall. Nanny might have been with them had she chosen, but she preferred to sit alone in the darkest corner of the hall and gaze with jealous, unhappy eyes at the mirthful group about the fire, listening to their story and jest and laughter, with unavailing protests in her heart. Oh, how could they have forgotten so soon? It was not yet a full year since Miss Avis had gone. Last Christmas Eve she had sat there, a sweet and saintly presence in the ingle nook, more, so it had always seemed, the center of the home circle than the father and mother. And now the December stars were shining over her grave, and not one of that heedless group remembered her. Not once was her name spoken. Even her old dog had forgotten her. He sat with his nose in Margaret's lap, blinking with drowsy aged contentment at the fire. "Oh, I can't bear it," whispered Nanny, under cover of the hearty laughter which greeted a story Dr. Fritz had been telling. She slipped out into the kitchen, put on her hood and cloak, and took from a box under the table a little wreath of holly. She had made it out of the bits left over from the decorations. Miss Avis had loved holly. Miss Avis had loved every green growing thing. As Nanny opened the kitchen door, something cold touched her hand, and there stood the old dog, wagging his tail and looking up at her with wistful eyes, mutely pleading to be taken too. "So you do remember her, Gyppy?" said Nanny, patting his head. "Come along, then. We'll go together." They slipped out into the night. It was quite dark, but it was not far to the graveyard, just out through the evergreens and along a field by-path and across a road. The old church was there, with its square tower, and the white stones gleaming all around it. Nanny went straight to a shadowy corner and knelt on the sere grasses while she placed her holly wreath on Miss Avis's grave. The tears in her eyes brimmed over. "Oh, Miss Avis, Miss Avis," she sobbed, "I miss you so. I miss you so. It can't ever seem like Christmas to me without you. You were always so sweet and kind to me. There ain't a day passes but I think of you and all the things you used to say to me, and I try to be good like you'd want me to be, but I hate them for forgetting you. Yes, I do. I'll never forget you, darling Miss Avis. I'd rather be here alone with you in the dark than back there with them." Nanny sat down by the grave. The old dog lay by her side, with his forepaws on the turf, and his eyes fixed on the tall white marble shaft. It was too dark for Nanny to read the inscription, but she knew every word of it. In loving remembrance of Avis Maywood, died January 20, 1902, aged 45. And underneath the lines of her own choosing: Say not good night, but in some brighter clime bid me good morning. But they had forgotten her. Oh, they had forgotten her already. When half an hour had passed, Nanny was startled by approaching footsteps. Not wishing to be seen, she crept softly behind the headstones into the shadow of the willow on the farther side, and the old dog followed. Dr. Fritz, coming to the grave, thought himself alone with the dead. He knelt down by the headstone and pressed his face against it. "Avis," he said gently, "dear Avis, I have come to visit your grave tonight because you seem nearer to me here than elsewhere. And I want to talk to you, Avis, as I have always talked to you every Christmastide since we were children together. I've missed you so tonight, dear friend and sympathizer. No words can tell you how I have missed you. Your welcoming hand clasp and your sweet face in the firelight shadows. I could not bear to speak your name. The aching sense of loss was so bitter. Amid all the Christmas mirth and good fellowship, I felt the sorrow of your vacant chair. Avis, I wanted to tell you what the year had brought to me. My theory has been proved. It has made me a famous man. Last Christmas, Avis, I told you of it, and you listened and understood and believed in it. Dear Avis, once again I thank you for all you have been to me, all you are yet. I have brought you your roses. They are white and pure and fragrant as your life." Other footsteps came so quickly on Dr. Fritz's retreating ones that Nanny could not rise. It was Laddie this time, gay, careless, thoughtless Laddie. "Roses? So Fritz has been here. I have brought you lilies, Avis. Oh, Avis, I miss you so. You were so jolly and good. You understood a fellow so well. I had to come here tonight to tell you how much I miss you. It doesn't seem half home without you, Avis. I'm trying to be a better chap, more the sort of man you'd have me be. I've given the old set the go-by. I'm trying to live up to your standard. It would be easier if you were here to help me. When I was a kid, it was always easier to be good for a while after I'd talked things over with you. I've got the best mother a fellow ever had, but you and I were such chums, weren't we, Avis? I thought I'd just break down in there tonight and put a damper on everything by crying like a baby. If anybody had spoken about you, I should have. Hello!" Laddie wheeled around with a start, but it was only Robert's two boys, who came shyly up to the grave, half hanging back to find anyone else there. "Hello, boys," said Laddie huskily. "So you've come to see her grave, too?" "Yes," said Cecil solemnly. We just had to. We couldn't go to bed without coming. Oh, isn't it lonesome without Cousin Avis?" "She was always so good to us," said Sid. "She used to talk to us so nice," said Cecil chokingly. "But she liked fun, too." "Boys," said Laddie gravely, "never forget what Cousin Avis used to say to you. Never forget that you have got to grow up into men she'd be proud of." They went away then, the boys and their boyish uncle, and when they had gone Nora came, stealing timidly through the shadows, starting at the rustle of the wind in the trees. "Oh, Avis," she whispered, "I want to see you so much. I want to tell you all about it, about him. You would understand so well. He is the best and dearest lover ever a girl had. You would think so, too. Oh, Avis, I miss you so much. There's a little shadow even on my happiness, because I can't talk it over with you in the old way. Oh, Avis, it was dreadful to sit around the fire tonight and not see you. Perhaps you were there in spirit. I loved to think you were, but I wanted to see you. You were always there to come home to before, Avis dear." Sobbing, she went away, and then came Margaret, the grave, strong Margaret. "Dear cousin, dear to me as a sister, it seemed to me that I must come to you here tonight. I cannot tell you how much I miss your wise, clear-sighted advice and judgment, your wholesome companionship. A little son was born to me this past year, Avis. How glad you would have been, for you knew, as none other did, the bitterness of my childless heart. How we would have delighted to talk over my baby together, and teach him wisely between us. Avis, Avis, your going made a blank that can never be filled for me." Margaret was still standing there when the old people came. "Father, Mother, isn't it too late and chilly for you to be here?" "No, Margaret, no," said the mother. "I couldn't go to my bed without coming to see Avis's grave. I brought her up from a baby. Her dying mother gave her to me. She was as much my own child as any of you, and oh, I miss her so. You only miss her when you come home, but I miss her all the time, every day." "We all miss her, Mother," said the old father tremulously. "She was a good girl. Avis was a good girl. Good night, Avis." "Say not good night, but in some brighter clime bid her good morning," quoted Margaret softly. "That was her own wish, you know. Let us go back now. It's getting late." When they had gone, Nanny crept out from the shadows. It did not occur to her that perhaps she should not have listened. She had been too shy to make her presence known to those who came to Avis's grave, but her heart was full of joy. "Oh, Miss Avis, I'm so glad, I'm so glad! They haven't forgotten you after all, Miss Avis, dear, not one of them. I'm sorry I was so cross at them, and I'm so glad they haven't forgotten you. I love them for it." Then the old dog and Nanny went home together. End of Chapter 28. The Unforgotten One. Read by Phil Schinneberg.
Story 29 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Polka Dottish. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 29. The Wooing of Bessie. When Lawrence Eastman began going to see Bessie Houghton, the Linfield people shrugged their shoulders and said he might have picked out someone a little younger and prettier. But then, of course, Bessie was well off. A 200-acre farm and a substantial bank account were worth going in for. Trust in Eastman for knowing upon which side his bread was buttered. Lawrence was only 20 and looked even younger, owing to his smooth, boyish face, curly hair, and half-girlish bloom. Bessie Houghton was in reality no more than 25, but Linfield people had the impression that she was past 30. She had always been older than her years. A quiet, reserved girl who dressed plainly and never went about with other young people. Her mother had died when Bessie was very young, and she had always kept house for her father. The responsibility had made her grave and mature. When she was 20, her father died and Bessie was his sole heir. She kept the farm and took the reins of government in her own capable hands. She made a success of it, too, which was more than many a man in Linfield had done. Bessie had never had a lover. She had never seemed like other girls, and passed for an old maid when her contemporaries were in the flush of social success and bloom. Mrs. Eastman, Lawrence's mother, was a widow with 2 sons. George, the older, was the mother's favorite, and the property had been willed to him by his father. To Lawrence had been left the few hundreds in the bank. He stayed at home and hired himself to George, thereby adding slowly to his small hoard. He had his eye on a farm in Linfield, but he was as yet a mere boy, and his plans for the future were very vague, until he fell in love with Bessie Houghton. In reality, nobody was more surprised over this than Lawrence himself. It had certainly been the last thing in his thoughts on the dark, damp night when he had overtaken Bessie walking home alone from prayer meeting, and had offered to drive her the rest of the way. Bessie assented and got into his buggy. At first she was very silent, and Lawrence, who was a bashful lad at the best of times, felt tongue-tied and uncomfortable. But presently Bessie, pitying his evident embarrassment, began to talk to him. She could talk well, and Lawrence found himself entering easily into the spirit of her piquant speeches. He had an odd feeling that he had never known Bessie Houghton before. He had certainly never guessed that she could be such good company. She was very different from the other girls he knew, but he decided that he liked the difference.
"Are you going to the party at Bailey's tomorrow night?"
he asked, as he helped her to alight at her door. "I don't know," she answered. "I'm invited, but I'm all alone, and parties have never been very much in my line." There was a wistful note in her voice, and Lawrence, detecting it, said hurriedly, not giving himself time to get frightened,
"Oh, you better go to this one, and if you like, I'll call around and take you."
He wondered if she would think him very presumptuous. He thought her voice sounded colder as she said, "I am afraid that it would be too much trouble for you."
"It wouldn't be any trouble at all,"
he stammered.
"I'd be very pleased to take you."
In the end, Bessie had consented to go, and the next evening Lawrence called for her in the rose-red autumn dusk. Bessie was ready and waiting. She was dressed in what was for her unusual elegance, and Lawrence wondered why people called Bessie Houghton so plain. Her figure was strikingly symmetrical and softly curved. Her abundant dark brown hair, instead of being parted plainly and drawn back into a prim coil as usual, was dressed high on her head, and a creamy rose nestled amid the becoming puffs and waves. She wore black, as she usually did, but it was a lustrous black silk, simply and fashionably made, with frost-like frills of lace at her firm round throat and dainty wrists. Her cheeks were delicately flushed, and her wood-brown eyes were sparkling under her long lashes. She offered him a half-open bud for his coat and pinned it on for him. As he looked down at her, he noticed what a sweet mouth she had, full and red, with a half-childlike curve. The fact that Lawrence Eastman took Bessie Houghton to the Baileys' party made quite a sensation at that festal scene. People nodded and winked and wondered. "An old maid and her money," said Milly Fiske spitefully. Milly, as was well known, had a liking for Lawrence herself. Lawrence began to go with Bessie Houghton regularly after that. In his single-mindedness he never feared that Bessie would misjudge his motives or imagine him to be prompted by mercenary designs. He never thought of her riches himself, and it never occurred to him that she would suppose he did. He soon realized that he loved her, and he ventured to hope timidly that she loved him in return. She was always rather reserved, but the few favors that meant nothing from other girls meant a great deal from Bessie. The evenings he spent with her in her pretty sitting room, their moonlight drives over long satin-smooth stretches of snowy roads, and their walks home from church and prayer meeting under the winter stars, were all so many moments of supreme happiness to Lawrence. Matters had gone thus far before Mrs. Eastman got her eyes open. At Mrs. Tom Bailey's quilting party, an officious gossip took care to inform her that Lawrence was supposed to be crazy over Bessie Houghton, who was, of course, encouraging him simply for the sake of having someone to beau her around, and who would certainly throw him over in the end, since she knew perfectly well that it was her money he was after. Mrs. Eastman was a proud woman and a determined one. She had always disliked Bessie Houghton, and she went home from the quilting resolved to put an instant stop to all such nonsense on her son's part. "Where's Laurie?" she asked abruptly, as she entered the small kitchen where George Eastman was lounging by the fire.
"Out in the stable grooming up Lady Grey,"
responded her older son sulkily.
"I suppose he's gadding off to see Bessie Houghton again, the young fool that he is. Why don't you put a stop to it?" "I'm going to put a stop to it,"
said Mrs. Eastman grimly.
"I'd have done it before if I'd known. You should have told me if you knew. I'm going to see Lawrence right now."
George Eastman muttered something inaudible as the door closed behind her. He was a short, thick-set man, not in the least like Lawrence, who was 10 years his junior. 2 years previously he had made a furtive attempt to pay court to Bessie Houghton for the sake of her wealth, and her decided repulse of his advances was a remembrance that made him grit his teeth yet. He had hated her bitterly ever since. Lawrence was brushing his pet mare's coat until it shone like satin, and whistling Annie Laurie until the rafters rang. Bessie had sung it for him the night before. He could see her plainly still as she looked then, in her gown of vivid red, a color particularly becoming to her, with her favorite laces at wrist and throat, and a white rose in her hair, which was dressed in the high becoming knot she had always worn since the night he had shyly told her that he liked it so. She had played and sung many of the sweet old Scotch ballads for him, and when she had gone to the door with him, he had taken both her hands in his, and, emboldened by the look in her brown eyes, he had stooped and kissed her. Then he had stepped back, filled with dismay at his own audacity, but Bessie had said no word of rebuke, and only blushed hotly crimson. She must care for him, he thought happily, or else she would have been angry. When his mother came in at the stable door, her face was hard and uncompromising.
"Laurie," she said sharply, "where are you going again tonight? You were out last night."
Well, Mother, I promised you I wasn't in any bad company. Come now, don't quiz a fellow too close.
"You're going to dangle after Bessie Houghton again. It's time you were told what a fool you are making of yourself. She's old enough to be your mother. The whole settlement is laughing at you."
Lawrence looked as if his mother had struck him a blow in the face. A dull purplish flush crept over his brow.
This is some of George's work, he broke out fiercely. He's been sending you on me, has he? Yes, he's jealous. He wanted Bessie himself, but she would not look at him. He thinks nobody knows it, but I do. Bessie marry him? It's very likely.
"Laurie Eastman, you are daft. George hasn't said anything to me. You surely don't imagine Bessie Houghton would marry you? And if she would, she's too old for you. Now, don't you hang around her any longer."
I will, said Lawrence flatly. I don't care what anybody says. You needn't worry over me. I can take care of myself.
Mrs. Eastman looked blankly at her son. He had never defied or disobeyed her in his life before. She had supposed her word would be law. Rebellion was something she had not dreamed of. Her lips tightened ominously, and her eyes narrowed.
"You're a bigger fool than I took you for,"
she said in a voice that trembled with anger.
"Bessie Houghton laughs at you everywhere. She knows you're just after her money, and she makes fun—"
Prove it, interrupted Lawrence undauntedly. I'm not going to put any faith in Linfield gossip. Prove it if you can.
"I can prove it. Maggie Hatfield told me what Bessie Houghton said to her about you. She said you were a lovesick fool, and she only went with you for a little amusement, and that if you thought you had nothing to do but marry her and hang up your hat there, you'd find yourself very mistaken."
Possibly, in her calmer moments, Mrs. Eastman might have shrunk from such a deliberate falsehood, although it was said of her in Linfield that she was not one to stick at a lie when the truth would not serve her purpose. Moreover, she felt quite sure that Lawrence would never ask Maggie Hatfield anything about it. Lawrence turned white to the lips.
Is that true, Mother?
He asked huskily.
"I warned you," replied his mother,
not choosing to repeat her statement.
"If you go after Bessie any more, you can take the consequences."
She drew her shawl about her pale, malicious face, and left him with a parting glance of contempt.
"I guess that'll settle him,"
she thought grimly.
"Bessie Houghton turned up her nose at George, but she shan't make a fool of Lawrence too."
Alone in the stable, Lawrence stood staring out at the dull red ball of the wintred sun with unseeing eyes. He had implicit faith in his mother, and the stab had gone straight to his heart. Bessie Houghton listened in vain that night for his well-known footfall on the veranda. The next night Lawrence went home with Milly Fiske from prayer meeting. taken her out from the crowd of other girls under Bessie Houghton's very eyes as she came down the steps of the little church. Bessie walked home alone. The night burned low in her sitting room, and in the mirror over the mantel she saw her own pale face, with its tragic, pain-stricken eyes. Annie Hillis, her help, was out. She was alone in the big house with her misery and despair. She went dizzily upstairs to her room and flung herself on the bed in the chill moonlight. "It is all over," she said dully. All night she lay there, fighting with her pain. In the wan, gray morning she looked at her mirrored self with pitying scorn, at the pallid face, the lifeless features, the dispirited eyes with their bluish circles. "What a fool I have been to imagine he could care for me," she said bitterly. "He has only been amusing himself with my folly. And to think I let him kiss me the other night!" She thought of that kiss with a pitiful shame. She hated herself for the weakness that could not check her tears. Her lonely life had been brightened by the companionship of her young lover. The youth and girlhood of which fate had cheated her had come to her with love. The future had looked rosy with promise. Now it had darkened with dourness and grayness. Maggie Hatfield came that day to sew. Bessie had intended to have a dark blue silk made up, and an evening waist of pale pink cashmere. She had expected to wear the latter at a party which was to come off a fortnight later, and she had got it to please Lawrence, because he had told her that pink was his favourite colour. She would have neither it nor the silk made up now. She put them both away, and instead brought out an ugly pattern of snuff brown stuff, bought years before and never used.
"But where's your lovely pink, Bessie?" asked the dressmaker. "Aren't you going to have it for the party?"
"No, I'm not going to have it made up at all," said Bessie listlessly. "It's too gay for me. I was foolish to think it would ever suit me. This brown will do for a spring suit. It doesn't make much difference what I wear." Maggie Hatfield, who had not been at the prayer meeting the night beforehand, knew nothing of what had occurred, looked at her curiously, wondering what Lawrence Eastman could see in her to be as crazy about her as some people said he was. Bessie was looking her oldest and plainest just then, with her hair combed severely back from her pale, dispirited face.
"It must be her money he is after," thought the dressmaker. "She looks over 30, and she can't pretend to be pretty. I believe she thinks a lot of him, though."
For the most part, Lynnfield people believed that Bessie had thrown Lawrence over. This opinion was borne out by his woebegone appearance. He was thin and pale. His face had lost its youthful curves and looked hard and mature. He was moody and taciturn, and his speech and manner were marked by a new cynicism. In April, a well-to-do storekeeper from an adjacent village began to court Bessie Houghton. He was over 50, and had never been a handsome man in his best days, but Lynnfield oracles opined that Bessie would take him. She couldn't expect to do any better, they said, and she was looking terribly old and dowdy all at once. In June, Maggie Hatfield went to the Eastmans to sew. The first bit of news she imparted to Mrs. Eastman was that Bessie Houghton had refused Jabez Leah. At least, he didn't come to see her any more. Mrs. Eastman twitched her thread viciously.
"Bessie Houghton was born an old maid,"
she said sharply.
"She thinks nobody is good enough for her, that's what the matter. Lawrence got some silly boy notion into his head last winter, but I soon put a stop to that."
"I always had the idea that Bessie thought a good deal of Lawrence," said Maggie. "She has never been the same since he left off going with her. I was up there the morning after the prayer meeting night people talk so much of, and she looked positively dreadful, as if she hadn't slept a wink the whole night."
"Nonsense,"
said Mrs. Eastman decisively.
"She would never think of taking a boy like him when she turned up her nose at better men. And I didn't want her for a daughter-in-law anyhow. I can't bear her. So I put my foot down in time. Lawrence sulked for a spell, of course, boy fashion, but he's been as fractious as a spoiled baby ever since."
"Well, I dare say you're right," assented the dressmaker. "But I must say I had always imagined that Bessie had a great notion of Lawrence. Of course, she's so quiet it is hard to tell. She never says a word about herself." There was an unsuspected listener to this conversation. Lawrence had come in from the field for a drink, and was standing in the open kitchen doorway, within easy earshot of the women's shrill tones. He had never doubted his mother's word at any time in his life, but now he knew beyond doubt that there had been crooked work somewhere. He shrank from believing his mother untrue, yet where else could the crookedness come in? When Mrs. Eastman had gone into the kitchen to prepare dinner, Maggie Hatfield was startled by the appearance of Lawrence at the low open window of the sitting room. "Mercy me! How you scared me!" she exclaimed nervously.
"Maggie," said Lawrence seriously, "I want to ask you a question. Did Bessie Houghton ever say anything to you about me, or did you ever say that she did? Give me a straight answer."
The dressmaker peered at him curiously. "No, Bessie never so much as mentioned your name to me," she said, "and I had never heard that she did to anyone else. Why?"
"Thank you. That was all I wanted to know," said Lawrence, ignoring her question, and disappearing as suddenly as he had come. That evening at moonrise he passed through the kitchen dressed in his Sunday best. His mother met him at the door.
"Where are you going?"
she asked querulously. Lawrence looked her squarely in the face with accusing eyes, before which her own quailed.
"I'm going to see Bessie Houghton, mother," he said sternly, "and to ask her pardon for believing the lie that has kept us apart so long."
Mrs. Eastman flushed crimson and opened her lips to speak. But something in Lawrence's grave, white face silenced her. She turned away without a word, knowing in her secret soul that her youngest born was lost to her forever. Lawrence found Bessie in the orchard under apple trees that were pyramids of pearly bloom. She looked at him through the twilight with reproach and aloofness in her eyes. But he put out his hands and caught her reluctant ones in a masterful grasp.
"Listen to me, Bessie. Don't condemn me before you heard me. I've been to blame for believing falsehoods about you, but I believe them no longer, and I've come to ask you to forgive me."
He told his story simply and straightforwardly. In strict justice he could not keep his mother's name out of it, but he merely said that she had been mistaken. Perhaps Bessie understood none the less. She knew what Mrs. Eastman's reputation in Lynnfield was. "You might have had a little more faith in me," she cried reproachfully.
I know. But I was beside myself with pain and wretchedness. Oh, Bessie, won't you forgive me? I love you so, and if you send me away, I'll go to the dogs. Forgive me, Bessie."
And she, being a woman, did forgive him. "I've loved you from the first, Lawrence," she said, yielding to his kiss. End of The Wooing of Bessie. Recording by Polkadottish.
Story 30 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Remington. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 30. Their Girl Josie. When Paul Morgan, a rising young lawyer with justifiable political aspirations, married Eleanor Ashton, leading woman at the Green Square Theater, his old schoolmates and neighbors in Spring Valley held up their hands in horror, and his father and mother up in the weather-gray Morgan homestead were crushed in the depths of humiliation. They had been too proud of Paul. their only son, and such a clever fellow. And this was their punishment. He had married an actress. To Cyrus and Deborah Morgan, brought up and nourished all their lives on the strictest and straightest of old-fashioned beliefs, both as regards this world and that which is to come, this was a tragedy. They could not be brought to see it in any other light. As their neighbors said, "Cy Morgan never hilt up his head again after Paul married that play-acting woman." But perhaps it was less his humiliation than his sorrow which bowed down his erect form and sprinkled gray in his thick black hair that 50 years had hitherto spared. For Paul, forgetting the sacrifices his mother and father had made for him, had bitterly resented the letter of protest his father had written concerning his marriage. He wrote one angry, unfilial letter back, and then came silence. Between grief and shame, Cyrus and Deborah Morgan grew old rapidly in the year that followed. At the end of that time, Eleanor Morgan, the mother of an hour, died. 3 months later, Paul Morgan was killed in a railroad collision. After the funeral, Cyrus Morgan brought home to his wife their son's little daughter, Jocelyn Morgan. Her aunt, Annice Ashton, had wanted the baby. Cyrus Morgan had been almost rude in his refusal. His son's daughter should never be brought up by an actress. It was bad enough that her mother had been one, and doubtless transmitted the taint to her child. But in Spring Valley, if anywhere, it might be eradicated. At first, neither Cyrus nor Deborah cared much for Jocelyn. They resented her parentage, her strange, un-Morgan-like name, and the pronounced resemblance she bore to the dark-haired, dark-eyed mother they had never seen. All the Morgans had been fair. If Jocelyn had had Paul's blue eyes and golden curls, her grandfather and grandmother would have loved her sooner. But the love came. It had to. No living mortal could have resisted Jocelyn. She was the most winsome and lovable little mite of babyhood that had ever toddled. Her big dark eyes overflowed with laughter before she could speak. Her puckered red mouth broke constantly into dimples and cooing sounds. She had ways that no orthodox Spring Valley baby even thought of having. Every smile was a caress, every gurgle of attempted speech a song. Her grandparents came to worship her, and were stricter than ever with her by reason of their love. Because she was so dear to them, she must be saved from her mother's blood. Jocelyn shot up, through a roly-poly childhood into slim, bewitching girlhood, in a chill, repressive atmosphere. Cyrus and Deborah were nothing if not thorough. The name of Jocelyn's mother was never mentioned to her. She was never called anything but Josie, which sounded more Christian-like than Jocelyn, and all the flowering out of her alien beauty was repressed as far as might be in the plainest and dullest of dresses, and the primmest arrangement possible to riotous, ripe brown curls. The girl was never allowed to visit her Aunt Annice. Although frequently invited, Miss Ashton, however, wrote to her occasionally, and every Christmas sent a box of presents which even Cyrus and Deborah Morgan could not forbid her to accept. Although they looked with disapproving eyes and ominously set lips at the dainty, frivolous trifles the actress woman sent, they would have liked to cast those painted fans and lace frills and beflounced lingerie into the fire as if they had been infected rags from a pest house. The path thus set for Jocelyn's dancing feet to walk in was indeed sedate and narrow. She was seldom allowed to mingle with the young people of even quiet, harmless Spring Valley. She was never allowed to attend local concerts, much less take part in them. She was forbidden to read novels, and Cyrus Morgan burned an old copy of Shakespeare which Paul had given him years ago, and which he had himself read and treasured, lest its perusal would awaken unlawful instincts in Jocelyn's heart. The girl's passion for reading was so marked that her grandparents felt that it was their duty to repress it as far as lay in their power. But Jocelyn's vitality was such that all her bonds and bands served but little to check or retard the growth of her rich nature. Do what they might, they could not make a Morgan out of her. Her every step was a dance, her every word and gesture full of grace and virility that filled the old folks with uneasy wonder. She seemed to them charged with dangerous tendencies, all the more potent from repression. She was sweet-tempered and sunny, truthful and honest, but she was as little like the trim, simple Spring Valley girls as a crimson rose is like a field daisy, and her unlikeness bore heavily on her grandparents. Yet they loved her and were proud of her. Our girl Josie, as they called her, was more to them than they would have admitted even to themselves, and in the main they were satisfied with her, although the grandmother grumbled because Josie did not take kindly to patchwork or rug making, and the grandfather would fain have toned down that exuberance of beauty and vivacity into the meeker pattern of maidenhood he had been accustomed to. When Jocelyn was 17, Deborah Morgan noticed a change in her. The girl became quieter and more brooding, falling at times into strange idle reveries with her hands clasped over her knee and her big eyes fixed unseeingly on space. Or she would creep away for solitary rambles in the beechwood, going away droopingly and returning with dusky glowing cheeks and a nameless radiance, as of some newly discovered power shining through every muscle and motion. Mrs. Morgan thought the child needed a tonic, and gave her sulphur and molasses. One day the revelation came. Cyrus and Deborah had driven across the valley to visit their married daughter. Not finding her at home, they returned. Miss Morgan went into the house while her husband went to the stable. Jocelyn was not in the kitchen, but the grandmother heard the sound of voices and laughter in the sitting room across the hall. "What company has Josie got?" she wondered, as she opened the hall door and paused for a moment on the threshold to listen. As she listened, her old face grew gray and pinched. She turned noiselessly and left the house, and flew to her husband as one distracted. "Cyrus! Josie is play-acting in the room, laughing and reciting and going on. I heard her. Oh, I've always feared it would break out on her, and it has. Come you and listen to her." The old couple crept through the kitchen and across the hall to the open parlor door, as if they were stalking a thief. Jocelyn's laugh rang out as they did so, a mocking, triumphant peal. Cyrus and Deborah shivered as if they had heard sacrilege. Jocelyn had put on a trailing, clinging black skirt, which her aunt had sent her a year ago, and which she had never been permitted to wear. It transformed her into a woman. She had cast aside her waist of dark plum-colored homespun, and wrapped a silken shawl about herself until only her beautiful arms and shoulders were bare. Her hair, glossy and brown, with burnished red lights where the rays of the dull autumn sun struck on it through the window, was heaped high on her head and held in place by a fillet of pearl beads. Her cheeks were crimson, her whole body from head to foot instinct and alive with a beauty that to Cyrus and Deborah, as they stood mute with horror in the open doorway, seemed akin to some devilish enchantment. Jocelyn, wrapped away from her surroundings, did not perceive her grandparents. Her face was turned from them, and she was addressing an unseen auditor in passionate denunciation. She spoke, moved, posed, gesticulated, with an inborn genius shining through every motion and tone like an illuminating lamp. "Josie, what are you doing?" It was Cyrus who spoke, advancing into the room like a stern, hard impersonation of judgment. Jocelyn's outstretched arm fell to her side, and she turned sharply around. Fear came into her face, and the light went out of it. A moment before she had been a woman, splendid, unafraid. Now she was again the schoolgirl, too confused and ashamed to speak. "What are you doing, Josie, dressed up in that indecent manner, and talking and twisting yourself?" Jocelyn's face, that had grown pale, flamed scarlet again. She lifted her head proudly. "I was trying Aunt Anice's part in her new play," she answered. "I have not been doing anything wrong, grandfather." "Wrong? It's your mother's blood coming out in you, girl, in spite of all our care. Where did you get that play?" "Aunt Anice sent it to me," answered Jocelyn, casting a quick glance at the book on the table. Then, when her grandfather picked it up gingerly as if he feared contamination, she added quickly, "Oh, give it to me, please, grandfather. Don't take it away." "I'm going to burn it," said Cyrus Morgan sternly. "Oh, don't, grandfather," cried Josie, with a sob in her voice. "Don't burn it, please. I won't practice out of it any more. I'm sorry I've displeased you. Please give me my book." "No," was the stern reply. "Go to your room, girl, and take off that rig. There is to be no more play-acting in my house. Remember that." He flung the book into the fire that was burning in the grate. For the first time in her life Jocelyn flamed out into passionate defiance. You are cruel and unjust, grandfather. I have done no wrong. It is not doing wrong to develop the one gift I have. It's the only thing I can do, and I'm going to do it. My mother was an actress and a good woman. So was Aunt Annice, so I mean to be." "Oh, Josie, Josie," said her grandmother in a scared voice. Her grandfather only repeated sternly, "Go take off that rig, girl, and let us hear no more of this." Jocelyn went, but she left consternation behind her. Cyrus and Deborah could not have been more shocked if they had discovered the girl robbing her grandfather's desk. They talked the matter over bitterly at the kitchen hearth that night. "We haven't been strict enough with the girl, Mother," said Cyrus angrily. "We'll have to be stricter if we don't want to have her disgracing us. Did you hear how she defied me? 'So I mean to be,' she says. Mother, we'll have trouble with that girl yet." "Don't be too harsh with her, Pa. It'll maybe only drive her to worse," sobbed Deborah. "I ain't going to be harsh. What I do is for her own good. You know that, Mother. Josie is as dear to me as she is to you, but we've got to be stricter with her." They were. From that day Josie was watched and distrusted. She was never permitted to be alone. There were no more solitary walks. She felt herself under the surveillance of cold, unsympathetic eyes every moment, and her very soul writhed. Jocelyn Morgan, the high-spirited daughter of high-spirited parents, could not submit to such treatment. It might have passed with a child. To a woman, thrilling with life and conscious power to her very fingertips, it was galling beyond measure. Jocelyn rebelled, but she did nothing secretly. That was not her nature. She wrote to her Aunt Annice, and when she received her reply she went straight and fearlessly to her grandparents with it. "Grandfather, this letter is from my aunt. She wishes me to go and live with her and prepare for the stage. I told her I wished to do so. I am going." Cyrus and Deborah looked at her in mute dismay. "I know you despise the profession of an actress," the girl went on with heightened color. "I'm sorry you think so about it, because it is the only one open to me. I must go. I must." "Yes, you must," said Cyrus cruelly. "It's in your blood. Your bad blood, girl." "My blood isn't bad," cried Jocelyn proudly. "My mother was a sweet, true, good woman. You are unjust, grandfather, but I don't want you to be angry with me. I love you both, and I am very grateful indeed for all your kindness to me. I wish that you could understand what—" "We understand enough," interrupted Cyrus harshly. "This is all I have to say. Go to your play-acting aunt if you want to. Your grandmother and me won't hinder you. But you'll come back here no more. We'll have nothing further to do with you. You can choose your own way and walk in it." With this dictum Jocelyn went from Spring Valley. She clung to Deborah and wept at parting, but Cyrus did not even say good-bye to her. On the morning of her departure he went away on business and did not return until evening. Jocelyn went on the stage. Her aunt's influence and her mother's fame helped her much. She missed the hard experiences that come to the unassisted beginner, but her own genius must have won in any case. She had all her mother's gifts, deepened by her inheritance of Morgan intensity and sincerity, much, too, of the Morgan firmness of will. When Jocelyn Morgan was 22, she was famous over 2 continents. When Cyrus Morgan returned home on the evening after his granddaughter's departure, he told his wife that she was never to mention the girl's name in his hearing again. Deborah obeyed. She thought her husband was right, albeit she might in her own heart deplore the necessity of such a decree. Jocelyn had disgraced them. Could that be forgiven? Nevertheless, both the old people missed her terribly. The house seemed to have lost its soul with that vivid, ripely tinted young life. They got their married daughter's oldest girl, Pauline, to come and stay with them. Pauline was a quiet, docile maiden, industrious and commonplace. Just such a girl as they had vainly striven to make of Jocelyn, to whom Pauline had always been held up as a model. Neither Cyrus nor Deborah took to her, and they let her go unregretfully when they found she wished to return home. "She hasn't any of Josie's gimp," was Cyrus's unspoken fault. Deborah spoke, but all she said was, "Polly's a good girl, father, only she hasn't any snap." Jocelyn wrote to Deborah occasionally, telling her freely of her plans and doings. If it hurt the girl that no notice was ever taken of her letters, she still wrote them. Deborah read the letters grimly and left them in Cyrus's way. Cyrus would not read them at first. Later on he read them stealthily when Deborah was out of the house. When Jocelyn began to succeed, she sent the old farmhouse papers and magazines containing her photographs and criticisms on her plays and acting. Deborah cut them out and kept them in her upper bureau drawer with Jocelyn's letters. Once she overlooked one, and Cyrus found it when he was kindling the fire. He got the scissors and cut it out carefully. A month later Deborah discovered it between the leaves of the family Bible. But Jocelyn's name was never mentioned between them, and when other people asked them concerning her their replies were cold and ungracious. In a way they had relented towards her, but their shame of her remained. They could never forget that she was an actress. Once, 6 years after Jocelyn had left Spring Valley, Cyrus, who was reading a paper by the table, got up with an angry exclamation and stuffed it into the stove, thumping the lid on over it with grim malignity. "That fool don't know what he's talking about," was all he would say. Deborah had her share of curiosity. The paper was the National Gazette, and she knew that their next-door neighbor, James Pennon, took it. She went over that evening and borrowed it, saying that their own had been burned before she had had time to read the serial in it. With one exception, she read all its columns carefully, without finding anything to explain her husband's anger. Then she doubtfully plunged into the exception, a column of stage notes. Halfway down she came upon the adverse criticism of Jocelyn Morgan and her new play. It was malicious and vituperative. Deborah Morgan's old eyes sparkled dangerously as she read it. "I guess somebody is pretty jealous of Josie," she muttered. "I don't wonder Pa was riled up, but I guess she can hold her own. She's a Morgan." No long time after this Cyrus took a notion he'd like a trip to the city. He'd like to see the horse fair and look up Cousin Hiram Morgan's folks. "Hiram and me used to be great chums, Mother, and we're getting kind of mossy, I guess, never stirring out of Spring Valley. Let's go and dissipate for a week. What say?" Deborah agreed readily, albeit of late years she had been much adverse to going far from home, and had never at any time been very fond of Cousin Hiram's wife. Cyrus was as pleased as a child over their trip. On the second day of their sojourn in the city he slipped away when Deborah had gone shopping with Mrs. Hiram, and hurried through the streets to the Green Square Theatre with a hang-dog look. He bought a ticket apologetically, and sneaked into his seat. It was a matinee performance, and Jocelyn Morgan was starring in her famous new play. Cyrus waited for the curtain to rise, feeling as if every one of his Spring Valley neighbors must know where he was and revile him for it, if Deborah were to ever find out. But Deborah must never find out. For the first time in their married life the old man deliberately plotted to deceive his old wife. He must see his girl Josie just once. It was a terrible thing that she was an actress, but she was a successful one. Nobody could deny that, except fools who yapped in the National Gazette. The curtain went up, and Cyrus rubbed his eyes. He had certainly braced his nerves to behold some mystery of iniquity. Instead, he saw an old kitchen, so like his own at home that it bewildered him. And there, sitting by the cheery wood stove, in homespun gown, with primly braided hair, was Jocelyn, his girl Josie, as he had seen her 1,000 times by his own Ingleside. The building rang with applause. One old man pulled out a red bandana and wiped tears of joy and pride from his eyes. She hadn't changed. Josie hadn't changed. Play acting hadn't spoiled her. Couldn't spoil her. Wasn't she Paul's daughter? And all this applause was for her, for Josie. Jocelyn's new play was a homely, pleasant production with rollicking comedy and heart-moving pathos skillfully commingled. Jocelyn pervaded it all with a convincing simplicity that was really a triumph of art. Cyrus Morgan listened and exulted in her. At every burst of applause his eyes gleamed with pride. He wanted to go on the stage and box the ears of the villain who plotted against her. He wanted to shake hands with the good woman who stood by her. He wanted to pay off the mortgage and make Josie happy. He wiped tears from his eyes in the third act when Josie was turned out of doors. and when the fourth left her a happy, blushing bride, hand in hand with her farmer lover, he could have wept again for joy. Cyrus Morgan went out into the daylight feeling as if he had awakened from a dream. At the outer door he came upon Mrs. Hiram and Deborah. Deborah's face was stained with tears, and she caught his hand. "Oh, Pa, wasn't it splendid? Wasn't our girl Josie splendid? I'm so proud of her. Oh, I was bound to hear her. I was afraid you'd be mad, so I didn't let on. And when I saw you in the seat down there, I couldn't believe my eyes. Oh, I've just been crying the whole time. Wasn't it splendid? Wasn't our girl Josie splendid?" The crowd around looked at the old pair with amused, indulgent curiosity, but they were quite oblivious to their surroundings, even to Mrs. Hiram's anxiety to decoy them away. Cyrus Morgan cleared his throat and said, "It was great, Mother, great. She took the shine off the other play actors all right. I knew that National Gazette man didn't know what he was talking about. Mother, let's go and see Josie right off. She's stopping with her aunt at the Maybury Hotel. I saw it in the paper this morning. I'm going to tell her she was right and we were wrong. Josie beat them all, and I'm going to tell her so." End of Our Girl Josie. Recording by Michelle Remington.
Story 31 of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 31, When Jack and Jill Took a Hand. Jack's Side of It. Jill says I have to begin this story because it was me, it was I, who made all the trouble in the first place. That is so like Jill. She is such a good hand at forgetting. Why, it was she who suggested the plot to me. I should never have thought of it myself. Not that Jill is any smarter than I am, either, but girls are such creatures for planning up mischief and leading other folks into it, and then laying the blame on them when things go wrong. How could I tell Dick would act so like a mule? I thought grown-up folks had more sense. Aunt Tommy was down on me for weeks while she thought Jill was a regular heroine. But there, girls don't know anything about being fair, and I am determined I will never have anything more to do with them and their love affairs as long as I live. Jill says I will change my mind when I grow up, but I won't. Still, Jill is a pretty good sort of a girl. I have to scold her sometimes, but if any other chap tried to, I would punch his head for him. I suppose it is time I explained who Dick and Aunt Tommy are. Dick is our minister. He hasn't been it very long. He only came a year ago. I shall never forget how surprised Jill and I were that first Sunday we went to church and saw him. We had always thought that ministers had to be old. All the ministers we knew were. Mr. Grinnell, the one before Dick came, must have been as old as Methuselah. But Dick was young and good-looking. Jill said she thought it a positive sin for a minister to be so good-looking. It didn't seem Christian, but that was just because all the ministers we knew happened to be homely, so that it didn't appear natural. Dick was tall and pale and looked as if he had heaps of brains. He had thick curly brown hair and big dark blue eyes. Jill said his eyes were like an archangel's, but how could she tell? She never saw an archangel. I liked his nose. It was so straight and finished looking. Mr. Grinnell had the worst looking nose you ever saw. Jill and I used to make poetry about it in church to keep from falling asleep when he preached such awful long sermons. Dick preached great sermons. They were so nice and short. It was so much fun to hear him thump the pulpit when he got excited. And when he got more excited still, he would lean over the pulpit, his face all white, and talk so low and solemn that it would just send the most gorgeous thrills through you. Dick came to Owlwood. That's our place. I hate these explanations quite a lot. Even before Aunt Tommy came. He and Father were chums. They had been in college together, and Father said Dick was the best football player he ever knew. Jill and I soon got acquainted with him, and this was another uncanny thing. We had never thought it possible to get acquainted with a minister. Jill said she didn't think it proper for a real live minister to be so chummy. But then Jill was a little jealous because Dick and I, being both men, were better friends than he and she could be. He taught me to skate that winter, and fence with canes, and do long division. I could never understand long division before Dick came, although I was away on in fractions. Jill has just been in and says I ought to explain that Dick's name wasn't Dick. I do wish Jill would mind her own business. Of course it wasn't. His real name was the Reverend Stephen Richmond, but Jill and I always called him Dick behind his back. It seemed so jolly and venturesome somehow to speak of a minister like that. Only we had to be careful not to let Father and Mother hear us. Mother wouldn't even let Father call Dick Stephen. She said it would set a bad example of familiarity to the children. Mother is an old darling. She won't believe we're half as bad as we are. Well, early in May comes Aunt Tommy. I must explain who Aunt Tommy is, or Jill will be at me again. She is Father's youngest sister, and her real name is Bertha Gordon, but Father has always called her Tommy, and she likes it. Jill and I had never seen Aunt Tommy before, but we took to her from the start because she was so pretty and because she talked to us just as if we were grown up. She called Jill Elizabeth, and Jill would adore a Hottentot who called her Elizabeth. Aunt Tommy is the prettiest girl I ever saw. If Jill is half as good looking when she gets to be 20, she's only 10 now, same age as I am, we're twins, I shall be proud of her for a sister. Aunt Tommy is all white and dimpled. She has curly red hair and big jolly brown eyes and scrumptious freckles. I do like freckles in a girl, although Jill goes wild if she thinks she has one on her nose. When we talked of writing this story, Jill said I wasn't to say that Aunt Tommy had freckles because it wouldn't sound romantic. But I don't care. She has freckles, and I think they are all right. We went to church with Aunt Tommy the first Sunday after she came, one on each side of her. Aunt Tommy is the only girl in the world I'd walk hand in hand with before people. She looked fine that day. She had on a gorgeous dress, all frills and ruffles, and a big white floppy hat. I was proud of her for an aunt, I can tell you, and I was anxious for Dick to see her. When he came up to speak to me and Jill after church came out, I said, "Aunt Tommy, this is Mr. Richmond," just like the grown-up people say. Aunt Tommy and Dick shook hands, and Dick got as red as anything. It was funny to see him. The next evening he came down to Owlwood. We hadn't expected him until Tuesday, for he never came Monday night before. That is Father's night for going to a lodge meeting. Mother was away this time, too. I met Dick on the porch and took him into the parlor, thinking what a bully talk we could have all alone together without Jill bothering around. But in a minute Aunt Tommy came in, and she and Dick began to talk, and I just couldn't get a word in edgewise. I got so disgusted I started out, but I don't believe they ever noticed I was gone. I liked Aunt Tommy very well, but I didn't think she had any business to monopolize Dick like that when he and I were such old chums. Outside I came across Jill. She was sitting all alone in the dark, curled up on the edge of the veranda just where she could see into the parlor through the big glass door. I sat down beside her, for I wanted sympathy. "Dick's in there talking to Aunt Tommy," I said. "I don't see what makes him want to talk to her." "What a goose you are," said Jill, in that aggravating, patronizing way of hers. "Why, Dick has fallen in love with Aunt Tommy." Honest, I jumped. I never was so surprised. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because I do," said Jill. "I knew it yesterday at church, and I think it is so romantic." "I don't see how you can tell," I said, and I didn't. "You'll understand better when you get older," said Jill. Sometimes Jill talks as if she were 100 years older than I am, instead of being a twin, and really sometimes I think she is older. "I didn't think ministers ever fell in love," I protested. "Some do," said Jill sagely. "Mr. Grinnell wouldn't ever, I suppose. But Dick is different. I'd like him for a husband myself, but he'd be too old for me by the time I grew up, so I suppose I'll have to let Aunt Tommy have him. It will be all in the family anyhow. That is one comfort. I think Aunt Tommy ought to have me for a flower girl, and I'll wear pink silk clouded over with white chiffon and carry a big bouquet of roses. Jill, you take my breath away, I said, and she did. My imagination couldn't travel as fast as that. But after I had thought the idea over a bit, I liked it. It was a good deal like a book, and besides, a minister is a respectable thing to have in a family. We must help them all we can, said Jill. What can we do? I asked. We must praise Dick to Aunt Tommy and Aunt Tommy to Dick, and we must keep out of the way. We mustn't ever hang around when they want to be alone, said Jill. I don't want to give up being chums with Dick, I grumbled. We must be self-sacrificing, said Jill, and that sounded so fine it reconciled me to the attempt. We sat there and watched Dick and Aunt Tommy for an hour. I thought they were awfully prim and stiff. If I'd been Dick, I'd have gone over and hugged her. I said so to Jill, and Jill was shocked. She said it wouldn't be proper when they weren't even engaged. When Dick went away, Aunt Tommy came out to the veranda and discovered us. She sat down between us and put her arms about us. Aunt Tommy has such cute ways. I like your minister very much, she said. He's bully, I said. He's as handsome as a prince, Jill said. He preaches splendid sermons. He makes people sit up in church, I can tell you, I said. He has a heavenly tenor voice, Jill said. He's got a magnificent muscle, I said. He has the most poetical eyes, Jill said. He swims like a duck, I said. He looks like a Greek god, Jill said. I'm sure Jill couldn't have known what a Greek god looked like, but I suppose she got the comparison out of some novel. Jill is always reading novels. She borrows them from the cook. Aunt Tommy laughed and said, You darlings. For the next 3 months, Jill and I were wild. It was just like reading a serial story to watch Dick and Aunt Tommy. One day when Dick came, Aunt Tommy wasn't quite ready to come down, so Jill and I went into the parlor to help things along. We knew we hadn't much time, so we began right off. Aunt Tommy is the jolliest girl I know, I said. She is as beautiful as a dream, Jill said. She can play games as good as a boy, I said. She does the most elegant fancy work, Jill said. She never gets mad, I said. She plays and sings divinely, Jill said. She can cook awfully good things, I said, for I was beginning to run short of compliments. Jill was horrified. She said afterwards that it wasn't a bit romantic, but I don't care. I believe Dick liked it, for he smiled with his eyes just as he always does when he's pleased. Girls don't understand everything. But at the end of 3 months we began to get anxious. Things were going so slow. Dick and Aunt Tommy didn't seem a bit further ahead than at first. Jill said it was because Aunt Tommy didn't encourage Dick enough. I do wish we could hurry them up a little, she said. At this rate they will never be married this year, and by next I'll be too big to be a flower girl. I'm stretching out horribly as it is. Mother has had to let down my frocks again. I wish they would get engaged and have done with it, I said. My mind would be at rest then. It's all Dick's fault. Why doesn't he ask Aunt Tommy to marry him? What makes him so slow about it? If I wanted a girl to marry me, but I wouldn't ever, I'd tell her so right spang off. I suppose ministers have to be more dignified, said Jill, but 3 months ought to be enough time for anyone, and Aunt Tommy is only going to be here another month. If Dick could be made a little jealous, it would hurry him up, and he could be made jealous if you had any spunk about you. I guess I've got more spunk than you have, I said. The trouble with Dick is this, said Jill. There is nobody else coming to see Aunt Tommy, and he thinks he is sure of her. If you could tell him something different, it would stir him up. Are you sure it would? I asked. It always does in novels, said Jill, and that settled it, of course. Jill and I fixed up what I was to say, and Jill made me say it over and over again, To be sure, I had it right. I told her, sarcastically, that she'd better say it herself, and then it would be done properly. Jill said she would if it were Aunt Tommy, but when it was Dick, it was better for a man to do it. So, of course, I agreed. I didn't know when I would have a chance to stir Dick up, but Providence, so Jill said, favored us. Aunt Tommy didn't expect Dick down the next night, so she and Father and Mother all went away somewhere. Dick came after all, and Jill sent me into the parlor to tell him. He was standing before the mantel looking at Aunt Tommy's picture. There was such an adoring look in his eyes, I could see it quite plain in the mirror before him. I practiced that look a lot before my own glass after that, because I thought it might come in handy sometime, you know. But I guess I couldn't have got it just right, because when I tried it on Jill, she asked me if I had a pain. "Well, Jack, old man," said Dick, sitting down on the sofa. I sat down before him. "Aunt Tommy is out," I said, to get the worst over. "I guess you like Aunt Tommy pretty well, don't you, Mr. Richmond?" "Yes," said Dick softly. "So do other men," I said mysteriously, as Jill had ordered me. Dick thumped one of the sofa pillows. "Yes, I suppose so," he said. "There's a man in New York who just worships Aunt Tommy," I said. "He writes her most every day, and sends her books and music and elegant presents. I guess she's pretty fond of him, too. She keeps his photograph on her bedroom table, and I've seen her kissing it." I stopped there, not because I had said all I had to say, but because Dick's face scared me. Honest, it did. It had all gone white, like it does in the pulpit sometimes when he is tremendously in earnest, only 10 times worse. But all he said was, "Is your Aunt Bertha engaged to this man?" "Not exactly engaged," I said, "but I guess anybody else who wants to marry her will have to reckon with him." Dick got up. "I think I won't wait this evening," he said. "I wish you'd stay and have a talk with me," I said. "I haven't had a talk with you for ages, and I have a million things to tell you." Dick smiled as if it hurt him to smile. "I can't tonight, Jackie. Some other time we'll have a good powwow, old chap." He took his hat and went out. Then Jill came flying in to hear all about it. I told her as well as I could, but she wasn't satisfied. If Dick took it so quietly, she declared, I couldn't have made it strong enough. "If you had seen Dick's face," I said, "you would have thought I made it plenty strong. And I'd like to know what Aunt Tommy will say to all this when she finds out." "Well, you didn't tell a thing but what was true," said Jill. The next evening was Dick's regular night for coming, but he didn't come, although Jill and I went down the lane a dozen times to watch for him. The night after that was prayer meeting night. Dick had always walked home with Aunt Tommy and us, but that night he didn't. He only just bowed and smiled as he passed us in the porch. Aunt Tommy hardly spoke all the way home, only just held tight to Jill's and my hands. But after we got home she seemed in great spirits and laughed and chatted with Father and Mother. "What does this mean?" asked Jill, grabbing me in the hall on our way to bed. "You'd better get another novel from the cook and find out," I said grouchily. I was disgusted with things in general, and Dick in particular. The 3 weeks that followed were awful. Dick never came near Owlwood. Jill and I fought every day. We were so cross and disappointed. Nothing had come out right, and Jill blamed it all on me. She said I must have made it too strong. There was no fun in anything, not even in going to church. Dick hardly thumped the pulpit at all, and when he did, it was only a measly little thump. But Aunt Tommy didn't seem to worry any. She sang and laughed and joked from morning to night. "She doesn't mind Dick making an ass of himself anyway, that's one consolation," I said to Jill. "She is breaking her heart about it," said Jill, "and that's your consolation?" "I don't believe it," I said. "What makes you think so?" "She cries every night," said Jill. "I can tell by the look of her eyes in the morning." "She doesn't look half as woebegone over it as you do," I said. "If I had her reason for looking woebegone I wouldn't look it either," said Jill. I asked her to explain her meaning, but she only said that little boys couldn't understand those things. Things went on like this for another week. Then they reached, so Jill says, a climax. If Jill knows what that means, I don't. But Pinky Carew was the climax. Pinky's name is James, but Jill and I always call him Pinky because we couldn't bear him. He took to calling at Owlwood, and one evening he took Aunt Tommy out driving. Then Jill came to me. "Something has got to be done," she said resolutely. "I am not going to have Pinky Carew for an Uncle Tommy, and that is all there is about it. You must go straight to Dick and tell him the truth about the New York man." I looked at Jill to see if she were in earnest. When I saw that she was, I said, "I wouldn't take all the gems of Golconda and go and tell Dick that I've been hoaxing him. You can do it yourself, Jill Gordon." "You didn't tell him anything that wasn't true," said Jill. "I don't know how a minister might look upon it," I said. "Anyway, I won't go." "Then I suppose I've got to," said Jill very dolefully. "Yes, you'll have to," I said. And this finishes my part of the story, and Jill is going to tell the rest. But you needn't believe everything she says about me in it.
Jill's side of it. Jackie has made a fearful muddle of his part, but I suppose I shall just have to let it go. You couldn't expect much better of a boy. But I am determined to re-describe Aunt Tommy, for the way Jackie has done it is just disgraceful. I know exactly how to do it, the way it is always done in stories. Aunt Tommy is divinely beautiful. Her magnificent wealth of burnished auburn hair flows back in amethystine waves from her sun-kissed brow. Her eyes are gloriously dark and deep, like midnight lakes mirroring the stars of heaven. Her features are like sculptured marble, and her mouth is like a trembling, curving Cupid's bow. This is a classical allusion. Luscious and glowing as a dewy rose. Her creamy skin is as fair and flawless as the inner petals of a white lily. She may have a weeny-teeny freckle or two in summer, but you'd never notice. Her slender form is matchless in its symmetry, and her voice is like the ripple of a woodland brook. There, I'm sure that's ever so much better than Jackie's description, and now I can proceed with a clear conscience. Well, I didn't like the idea of going and explaining to Dick very much, but it had to be done unless I wanted to run the risk of having Pinky Carew in the family. So I went the next morning. I put on my very prettiest pink organdy dress and did my hair the new way, which is very becoming to me. When you are going to have an important interview with a man, it is always well to look your best. I put on my big hat with the wreath of pink roses that Aunt Tommy had brought me from New York, and took my spandy ruffled parasol. "With your shield or upon it, Jill," said Jackie when I started. This is another classical allusion. I went straight up the hill and down the road to the manse where Dick lived with his old housekeeper, Mrs. Dodge. She came to the door when I knocked, and I said very politely, "Can I see the Reverend Stephen Richmond, if you please?" Mrs. Dodge went upstairs and came right back saying would I please go up to the study. Up I went, my heart in my mouth, I can tell you, and there was Dick among his books, looking so pale and sorrowful and interesting, for all the world like Lord Algernon Francis in the splendid serial in the paper cook took. There was a Madonna on his desk that looked just like Aunt Tommy. "Good evening, Miss Elizabeth," said Dick, just as if I were grown up, you know. "Won't you sit down? Try that green velvet chair. I am sure it was created for a pink dress, and unfortunately neither Mrs. Dodge nor I possess one. How are all your people?" "We are all pretty well, thank you," I said. "Except Aunt Tommy, I was going to say she cries every night after she goes to bed, but I remembered just in time that if I were in Aunt Tommy's place I wouldn't want a man to know I cried about him, even if I did. So I said instead, she has got a cold." "Ah, indeed, I am sorry to hear it," said Dick, politely but coldly, as if it were part of his duty as a minister to be sorry for anybody who had a cold, but as if, apart from that, it was not a concern of his if Aunt Tommy had galloping consumption. "And Jack and I are terribly harrowed up in our minds," I went on. "That is what I have come to see you about." "Well, tell me all about it," said Dick. "I'm afraid to," I said. "I know you'll be cross, even if you are a minister. It's about what Jackie told you about that man in New York and Aunt Tommy." Dick turned red as fire. "I'd rather not discuss your Aunt Bertha's affairs," he said stiffly. "You must hear this," I cried, feeling thankful that Jackie hadn't come after all, for he'd never have gotten any farther ahead after that snub. it's all a mistake. There is a man in New York, and he just worships Aunt Tommy, and she just adores him. But he's 70 years old, and he's her Uncle Matthew who brought her up ever since her father died, and you've heard her talking about him 100 times. That's all, cross my heart solemn and true." You never saw anything like Dick's face when I stopped. It looked just like a sunrise. But he said slowly, "Why did Jackie tell me it in such a way?" "We wanted to make you jealous," I said. "I put Jackie up to it." "I didn't think it was in either of you to do such a thing," said Dick reproachfully. "Oh, Dick," I cried. Fancy my calling him Dick right to his face. "Jackie will never believe I really did it. He says I would never have dared. But it wasn't daring at all. It was just forgetting. Oh, Dick, we didn't mean any harm. We thought you weren't getting on fast enough, and we wanted to stir you up like they do in books. We thought if we made you jealous it would work all right. We didn't mean any harm. Oh, please forgive us." I was just ready to cry, but that dear Dick leaned over the table and patted my hand. "There, there, it's all right. I understand, and of course I forgive you. Don't cry, sweetheart." The way Dick said "sweetheart" was perfectly lovely. I envied Aunt Tommy, and I wanted to keep on crying so that he would go on comforting me. "And you'll come back to see Aunt Tommy again?" I said. Dick's face clouded over. He got up and walked around the room several times before he said a word. Then he came and sat down beside me and explained it all to me just as if I were grown up. "Sweetheart, we'll talk this all out. You see, it is this way. Your Aunt Bertha is the sweetest woman in the world, but I'm only a poor minister, and I have no right to ask her to share my life of hard work and self-denial. And even if I dared, I know she wouldn't do it. She doesn't care anything for me except as a friend. I never meant to tell her I cared for her, but I couldn't help going to Owlwood, even though I knew it was a weakness on my part. So now that I'm out of the habit of going, I think it would be wisest to stay out. It hurts dreadfully, but it would hurt worse after a while. Don't you agree with me, Miss Elizabeth?" I thought hard and fast. If I were in Aunt Tommy's place, I mightn't want a man to know I cried about him, but I was quite sure I'd rather have him know than have him stay away because he didn't know. So I spoke right up. "No, I don't, Mr. Richmond. Aunt Tommy does care. You just ask her. She cries every blessed night because you never come to Owlwood." "Oh, Elizabeth," said Dick. He got up and stalked about the room again. "You'll come back?" I said. "Yes," he answered. I drew a long breath. It was such a responsibility off my mind. "Then you'd better come down with me right off," I said, "for Pinky Carew had her out driving last night, and I want a stop put to that as soon as possible. Even if he is rich, he's a perfect pig." Dick got his hat and came. We walked up the road in lovely creamy yellow twilight, and I was oh so happy. "Isn't it just like a novel?" I said. "I am afraid, Elizabeth," said Dick preachily, "that you read too many novels, and not the right kind either. Some of these days I am going to ask you to promise me that you will read no more books except those your mother and I pick out for you." You don't know how squelched I felt. And I knew I would have to promise, too, for Dick can make me do anything he likes. When we got to Owlwood, I left Dick in the parlour and flew up to Aunt Tommy's room. I found her all scrunched up on her bed in the dark with her face in the pillows. "Aunt Tommy, Dick is down in the parlour and wants to see you," I said. Didn't Aunt Tommy fly up, though! "Oh, Jill, I'm not fit to be seen. Tell him I'll be down in a few minutes." I knew Aunt Tommy wanted to fix her hair and dab rosewater on her eyes, so I trotted meekly down and told Dick. Then I flew out to Jackie and dragged him around to the glass door. It was all hung over with vines and a wee bit ajar, so that we could see and hear everything that went on. Jackie said it was only sneaks that listened, but he didn't say it until the next day. At the time, he listened just as hard as I did. I didn't care if it was mean. I just had to listen. I was perfectly wild to hear how a man would propose and how a girl would accept, and it was too good a chance to lose. Presently in sweeps Aunt Tommy in an elegant dress, not a hair out of place. She looked perfectly sweet, only her nose was a little red. Dick looked at her for just a moment, then he stepped forward and took her right into his arms. Aunt Tommy drew back her head for just a second as if she were going to crush him in the dust, and then she just all kind of crumpled up, and her face went down on his shoulder. "Oh, Bertha, I love you, he said. Just like that, all quick and jerky. You have a queer way of showing it," said Aunt Tommy, all muffled. I was led to believe that there was another man whom you cared for, and I thought you were only trifling with me, so I sulked like a jealous fool. Bertha, darling, you do love me a little, don't you?" Aunt Tommy lifted her head and stuck up her mouth, and he kissed her, and there it was, all over, and they were engaged as quick as that, mind you. He didn't even go down on his knees. There was nothing romantic about it, and I was never so disgusted in my life. When I grow up and anybody proposes to me, he will have to be a good deal more flowery and eloquent than that, I can tell you, if he wants me to listen to him. I'd left Jackie peeking still, and I went to bed. After a long time Aunt Tommy came up to my room and sat down on my bed in the moonlight. "You dear, blessed Elizabeth," she said. "It's all right then, is it?" I asked. "Yes, it is all right, thanks to you, dearie. We are to be married in October, and somebody must be my little flower girl." "I think Dick will make a splendid husband," I said. "But, Aunt Tommy, you mustn't be too hard on Jackie. He only wanted to help things along, and it was I who put him up to it in the first place." "You have atoned by going and confessing," said Aunt Tommy with a hug. "Jackie had no business to put that off on you. I'll forgive him, of course, but I'll punish him by not letting him know that I will for a little while. Then I'll ask him to be a page at my wedding." Well, the wedding came off last week. It was a perfectly gorgeous affair. Aunt Tommy's dress was a dream, and so was mine, all pink silk and chiffon and carnations. Jackie made a magnificent page, too, in a suit of white velvet. The wedding cake was 4 stories high, and Dick looked perfectly handsome. He kissed me, too, right after he kissed Aunt Tommy. So everything turned out all right, and I believe Dick would never have dared to speak up if we hadn't helped things along. But Jackie and I have decided that we will never meddle in an affair of the kind again. It is too hard on the nerves. End of When Jack and Jill Took a Hand. Recording by Sarah Jennings. End of Lucy Maud Montgomery Short Stories, 1905 to 1906, by Lucy Maud Montgomery.